Worship without question. It begins as admiration, a glance that lingers too long, a word that carries more weight than it should. You find yourself studying the way they move, the cadence of their laughter, the force with which they occupy the room. Maybe it's someone you've always known, a parent, a mentor, a lover, or maybe it's a stranger whose presence electrifies the very air. At first, you think you're only inspired. You tell yourself this is what it means to look up to someone, to learn by imitation. But slowly, quietly, that healthy spark of admiration starts to mutate. You begin to rewrite the story of who they are. Their flaws become their mystique. You notice the roughness in their voice and convince yourself it's strength. The way they interrupt becomes a sign of confidence. Their indifference becomes wisdom. You overlook the moments they wound you, justify their coldness as honesty, frame their anger as passion. Every edge is rounded off, every shadow illuminated, until what remains is a version of them sculpted by your longing, not by their reality. You begin to defend their shortcomings with the same vigor you once reserved for their strengths. With time, you find yourself wanting to please them. You scan every word before you speak, measuring yourself against what you think they'd approve of. You shift your boundaries, little by little, then all at once. You downplay your needs, silence your discomfort, swallow your protests. You start to erase yourself, sanding off the roughness of your own soul until what's left is smooth and unobtrusive, easier to fit into the space they've left for you. Devotion becomes a form of amnesia. You forget what it felt like to stand your ground, to hold your own opinion without apology. You begin to second-guess every instinct, filtering your desires through the lens of their imagined judgment. You wonder what they would say, how they would choose, what they would do. Slowly their worldview becomes your script, their beliefs, your commandments, their moods, the weather that rules your days. There's a comfort in this surrender, the relief of not having to decide, the safety of living in someone else's shadow. It's easier to glorify them than to risk being flawed yourself. Easier to say yes than to face the tremor of their disappointment. You tell yourself this is love, that to devote yourself without question is the highest good. You believe that if you love hard enough, if you sacrifice enough, they will finally see you, finally accept you, finally love you back. But in the small hours, doubt creeps in. You feel the edges of yourself fraying. You hear your own voice, thinner, quieter, struggling to be heard. The things you used to love, your dreams, your boundaries, your stubbornness, begin to dissolve. You notice how much of yourself you've given away in the name of devotion, how little of your life feels truly your own. You realize, painfully, that the person you worshipped isn't a god, but a mirror, one that reflects only what you're willing to erase. You catch yourself making excuses to others. They're just tired, you say. They didn't mean it. That's just the way they are. You find yourself defending the indefensible, glorifying the hurt, transforming their flaws into virtues so convincingly that you begin to believe it yourself. You are no longer loving a person, but an idealized image, one that grows more powerful the more you diminish your own. The world outside narrows. You lose touch with friends who challenge your devotion, distance yourself from anyone who sees the cracks. You grow protective, defensive, determined to keep the illusion alive. You close ranks around your devotion, afraid of what you might find if you let doubt slip through. You would rather lose yourself than risk losing them. And one day, you wake to find you no longer know where you end and they begin. Your thoughts echo with their words. Your actions follow their patterns. Your boundaries, once so carefully drawn, are invisible now, erased by love, by longing, by the relentless pressure to become what you think they want. You stand in front of the mirror and see only their reflection, larger than life, obscuring the person you used to be. You try to remember who you were before worship turned into erasure. What did you want, independent of their desires? What did you believe before you took on their certainty as your own? The answers are blurred, lost beneath layers of self-abandonment. You mourn the lost parts of yourself, the defiant child, the questioning teenager, the adult who once dreamed of living on their own terms. But in this morning, something stirs. A faint, persistent hunger for truth. A wish to be seen for who you really are, not for the role you've played in their story. You realize that love, real love, requires boundaries. That true devotion is not self-erasure, but self-revelation. It is the courage to stand beside someone, not beneath them. To see their flaws for what they are, without glorification or denial. To love them not as a god, but as a fellow traveler, as flawed and finite as you. You begin, gently, to reclaim the pieces of yourself you left behind. You say no. You disagree. You let your own needs surface. Let your own desires speak. It's terrifying at first. The fear of losing their approval, the dread of conflict, the shame of seeming selfish. But with each act of honesty, you feel yourself returning. You remember that you are whole, even without their praise, that your boundaries are not barriers, but doors, ways for others to meet you, as you are, not as you pretend to be. The path back is slow, full of setbacks and relapses, moments when you ache to return to the comfort of worship. But each time you honor yourself, the world grows wider. You make room for difference, for disagreement, for the wild, sacred chaos of being fully human. You discover that real devotion is not about vanishing, but about daring to remain, present, visible, true. Tonight, as you lie awake and the echoes of their voice begin to fade, remind yourself that the greatest act of love is not to erase yourself, but to stay, to stand in your own light, imperfect and real, and invite others to do the same. In this way, worship becomes wonder, and devotion becomes freedom, and you return to yourself, not as an echo, but as the only witness who truly matters. Starvation for validation. Imagine living each day as if you're holding your breath, waiting for someone else to give you permission to exhale. Imagine shrinking your life, trimming away your own wildness, just to make room for the tiniest flicker of attention from someone who rarely looks up. This is starvation for validation, not the absence of food or water, but the absence of recognition. It's the desperate hope that someone, anyone, will finally see you, will finally nod in your direction, and in that moment, your soul will unfurl like a flower after a long drought. The hunger doesn't start all at once. It creeps in quietly, disguised as modesty, humility, patience. At first, you tell yourself you don't need much. A kind word, a half smile, a passing touch. You learn to ration your hopes, to shrink your appetite for affection. When real warmth doesn't come, you train yourself to subsist on scraps. A distracted, a brief glance, the ghost of a compliment left behind in a text message. You become an expert in extracting meaning from crumbs, convincing yourself that each one is a feast. Slowly, your dreams become smaller. The things that once made your heart race, big ambitions, bold ideas, private joys, start to feel selfish, even shameful. You tell yourself you're too much, too needy, too loud. You dim your own light so you don't outshine the people whose approval you crave. The world becomes a stage where you play the role of the grateful shadow, never asking for more than you're given, and still, you wait. You hope that one day, your patience will be rewarded, that the people you care for will finally notice the hunger in your eyes and offer you a seat at the table. But most of the time, they don't. People are busy, distracted, fighting their own invisible battles. They might toss you a smile, a word, but it never fills you. You pretend it does. You dress up their indifference as kindness. You imagine their silence as deep thought, their absence as mystery. You become an architect of excuses, building elaborate stories to explain away every cold shoulder, every overlooked moment, every empty space at your side. And all the while, you keep starving. You stop pursuing what matters to you, telling yourself that there will be time for your own dreams later, after you've earned your place in someone else's heart. You shrink your ambitions, let your hobbies gather dust, stifle your opinions so you don't risk alienating the very people whose validation you need. You become a master of self-denial, convincing yourself that you're strong, patient, wise. But inside, a gnawing emptiness grows, a famine that no outside praise can ever really satisfy. You see it in the way you check your phone, waiting for a message that never comes, in the way you replay old conversations, searching for signs that you mattered, in the way you swallow your words, convinced they'll only annoy or bore. You see it in the way you measure your worth by someone else's mood, their whims, their unpredictable bursts of attention. You are always waiting, always rationing, always hoping for the banquet that never arrives. Sometimes, you meet people who are generous with their affection, who offer you the attention you've been starving for. But by then, your hunger is so profound that you don't trust it. You push them away, or you cling too tightly, afraid they'll vanish at the first sign of need. The cycle repeats. Starved of validation, you sabotage yourself, convinced you are unworthy, unlovable, invisible. There are moments when the truth flickers in the back of your mind. You remember who you were before you began starving for scraps. Wild, whole, vivid. You remember what it felt like to love something just because it made you happy, to pursue a dream just because it was yours. But the hunger is louder, more immediate. It tells you to wait, to be patient, to swallow your needs until someone else gives you permission to exist. The world is full of people starving for validation, quietly, invisibly, expertly hiding their hunger behind smiles and busy schedules. We trade our dreams for likes, our joy for approval, our authenticity for a handful of fleeting nods. We learn to call the ache inside us normal, and in doing so, we forget what it feels like to be full. But starvation is not a life. It's a slow, silent unraveling. The scraps you collect will never fill you because true validation cannot come from outside. It can't be earned by shrinking or waiting or pretending you don't care. The feast you crave is one you must serve yourself, honoring your own needs, speaking your truth even when your voice shakes, pursuing your dreams even when no one is watching. It's terrifying at first. The hunger is familiar, fullness is not. You'll be tempted to run back to the comfort of scraps, to apologize for your appetite, to play small so you don't risk losing even the tiniest bit of attention. But the only way out is through. You must feed yourself, on your own approval, your own affection, your own willingness to stand in the light. The world may never give you what you crave. The people you wait for may never notice your hunger, may never offer more than crumbs. But you do not have to starve. You do not have to wait for permission to be whole or loud or hungry. You can choose even now to call your own name, to fill your own plate, to stop pretending that scraps are enough. And maybe, one day, you'll meet someone who sees your fullness, who offers you their own, not because you begged for it, but because you already know you're worthy. Until then, stop starving, stop shrinking, step out of the shadows. Give yourself the feast you deserve. Mirror of approval. You wake up, glance at your phone, and before you even stand up, your mind is already searching, wondering if anyone is thinking of you, talking about you, liking your latest post, or remembering your face. You step into the world and feel yourself scanning for signals. The raised eyebrow, the distracted nod, the too long silence, or the quick, approving laugh. Their moods, their words, their eyes, they become your weather, your reflection, your truth. You only feel solid when someone else gives you shape. This is the mirror of approval, a life spent seeing yourself only through the gaze of others, a hollow mirror that reflects their moods instead of your own unclaimed self-respect. It begins early. Before you have words for it, you learn to watch the faces around you. Are they pleased, proud, disappointed? Even as a child, you reach for their smiles, their approval, as if every nod is a coin dropped in the empty well of your self-worth. You smile wider, speak softer, shrink or stretch to fit their expectations. Each reaction becomes a verdict. Each frown, a warning, each smile, a reward. And so, piece by piece, your sense of who you are becomes tangled with their moods, their needs, their approval. Think back to school, where every gold star, every good job, every disappointed glance was magnified 100 times in your young mind. You learned to chase praise, to edit yourself for applause. You shrank from disapproval as if it were fire. Over time, this approval became your mirror. If they were happy, you were safe. If they were angry or indifferent, you faded, lost your outline. The real you, with all its needs and flaws, never got a chance to take shape. It was easier, safer, to become whatever would keep the mirror smiling. The mirror of approval never rests. In adulthood, it's there in every meeting, every conversation, every post online. You walk into a room and instantly you're reading faces, adjusting your words, your laugh, your posture. A compliment can light up your whole day. A look of boredom or irritation can ruin it. Sometimes you can feel yourself floating above, watching, calculating, guessing what they want, what they'll accept, how you can avoid that awkward silence, that sigh, that moment when their gaze slides off you and onto someone else. Each day your self-worth is traded, measured, and borrowed, never owned. But here's the haunting part. The more you chase approval, the emptier the mirror becomes. Each smile or nod feels good for a moment, but the high fades fast. You crave more, needing them to see you, to like you, to confirm that you are good, worthy, real. Yet every time you bend to fit someone else's expectations, the real you grows thinner, dimmer, lost in the fog of borrowed feelings. You become a shapeshifter, a mood detector, a ghost living for the echo of their approval. And what happens when the approval is withheld? When the faces turn cold or indifferent? When the smiles dry up and the silence grows? Suddenly you're left staring at a mirror with no reflection. You panic, scrambling to do more, say more, be more, just to get that glow back. You feel invisible, unloved, worthless. Not because you are, but because you've never learned to see yourself, except through their eyes. The truth is, the mirror of approval is a lie, a trick of light and shadow that keeps you forever reaching, never resting. The more you look to others to define you, the less you are able to define yourself. Your self-respect, instead of growing from your own values and achievements, is rented by the hour, always one bad day away from collapse. There are countless examples all around. The employee who works overtime, not for pride in their work, but because they fear a frown from the boss. The friend who laughs at every joke, even the mean ones, desperate to stay liked. The partner who loses themselves in the needs and moods of the other, forgetting their own desires just to avoid rocking the boat. The child who excels only for the applause, then falls apart when the clapping stops. Each is a prisoner of approval, lost in the reflection, never quite real. But this is not just sad, it's dangerous. Burn to be noticed. There's a strange itch beneath your skin, a need you can't name, an emptiness you can't soothe. You want to be seen, to be felt, to matter. But in a world where quiet is ignored and calm is invisible, it sometimes feels like the only way to exist is to set yourself on fire. You find yourself reaching for the match, not literal flames, but the small sparks of chaos, the detonations of drama, the deliberate sabotage of your own peace. Because for one brief scorching moment, you are finally noticed. You know how it starts. There's a lull, a calm, a silence that stretches too long. Maybe it's in a relationship where the days are gentle but bland, each conversation predictable, each touch routine. Or maybe it's in your family, where love is supposed to mean safety, but instead it tastes like stagnation. Or maybe it's inside you, where your own thoughts circle quietly, never raising their voices, never making demands. And in that stillness, you feel yourself fading, becoming invisible, less real, more ghost than person. So you reach for friction. You say the sharp word, send the risky text, drag old wounds out into the open. You accuse, you confess, you twist the knife just to see what bleeds. You watch the ripples, the raised voices, the flushed cheeks, the tears. For a moment, the world burns with color and heat. You're not ignored, you're the center. Even if it hurts, even if it's ugly, you exist. They see you, and for a moment, their gaze is as close to love as you remember feeling. Burn to be noticed. There's a strange itch beneath your skin, a need you can't name, an emptiness you can't soothe. You want to be seen, to be felt, to matter. But in a world where quiet is ignored and calm is invisible, it sometimes feels like the only way to exist is to set yourself on fire. You find yourself reaching for the match, not literal flames, but the small sparks of chaos, the detonations of drama, the deliberate sabotage of your own peace. Because for one brief scorching moment, you are finally noticed. You know how it starts. There's a lull, a calm, a silence that stretches too long. Maybe it's in a relationship where the days are gentle but bland, each conversation predictable, each touch routine. Or maybe it's in your family, where love is supposed to mean safety, but instead it tastes like stagnation. Or maybe it's inside you, where your own thoughts circle quietly, never raising their voices, never making demands. And in that stillness, you feel yourself fading, becoming invisible, less real, more ghost than person. So you reach for friction. You say the sharp word, send the risky text, drag old wounds out into the open. You accuse, you confess, you twist the knife just to see what bleeds. You watch the ripples, the raised voices, the flushed cheeks, the tears. For a moment, the world burns with color and heat. You're not ignored, you're the center. Even if it hurts, even if it's ugly, you exist. They see you, and for a moment, their gaze is as close to love as you remember feeling. Psychologists will call it self-sabotage, a craving for validation disguised as destruction, but they don't understand the coldness of peace, the suffocating quiet of a life where nothing interrupts, nothing demands, nothing feels urgent or wild or passionate. For some, calm is a blessing. For you, it's a slow erasure, a suffocating quiet where your heartbeat is the only thing you can hear, and even that grows faint. You might try to hold back, to appreciate the stillness. You tell yourself this is healthy, that stability is the reward for all the years spent lurching from crisis to crisis. But boredom is not safety, it's starvation. The soul wants friction, wants reaction, wants the proof that it can still shape the world around it. You want to feel their eyes on you, want to spark something real, even if it means scorching the ground you stand on. Think of all the times you started a fight you didn't believe in, just to feel the energy shift. The times you revealed a secret, or made a scene, or picked at an old scar until it bled, just to get a rise. The times you left the party in tears, or slammed the door, or threatened to leave. Not because you truly wanted to go, but because you needed someone to chase you, to remind you that your presence mattered enough to cause pain. There's a strange intimacy in chaos, in the heat of an argument, in the wreckage of a confession, in the desperate apologies after the storm. You find connection, raw, flawed, unforgettable. You can't feel love in the silence, but in the flames, in the mess, in the broken pieces, you find something that feels more real than peace ever could. It's not just relationships. It happens everywhere. In friendships, in workplaces, even with strangers. You stir the pot, ignite rumors, challenge authority, disrupt the calm, just to see what happens. You're not addicted to pain. You're addicted to feeling, to being the cause, the catalyst, the spark, to knowing that your presence can change the air, rearrange the faces in the room, leave a mark, even if it's a burn. Sometimes you hate yourself for it. After the smoke clears, after the silence returns, you wonder why you couldn't just let things be, why you couldn't accept comfort, why you had to make a scene, ruin a night, turn love into ash. But deep down, you know the answer. When silence is the alternative, you will always choose noise. When invisibility is the cost of peace, you will always choose fire. There are nights when you lie awake, replaying every explosion, every burned bridge. You wonder if anyone will ever love you without the drama, if anyone can see you in the quiet, hold you in the calm, make you feel real without the need for flames. Maybe that's the hope that keeps you reaching for chaos. Maybe it's the fear that no one will. But the pattern continues. The itch returns. You burn and burn just to see who comes running. You crave the proof of pain, the evidence that you exist. Sometimes, the only way to be noticed is to be the problem, the storm, the emergency. You wonder if you'll ever break free, if you'll ever learn to find love in the calm, or if you're destined to be a flare in the night. Brilliant, brief, destructive, unforgettable. And still, the world offers you chances to start over, to try peace again. Sometimes you take them, sometimes you don't. The truth is, it's not always a choice. It's a reflex, a survival instinct, a hunger. You light the match, you watch it burn, you dance in the glow. Because chaos feels like company. Because fire feels like proof. Because to burn is to be noticed, and to be noticed, even for a moment, is to feel alive. So you ignite another spark, say another reckless word, push the peace aside, just to see the world light up again. It's not because you want destruction, it's because you want presence, attention, love, even if it's dressed as chaos. For a moment, you are not invisible. For a moment, you matter. For a moment, you burn and the world can't look away. Highs without anchors. There's a certain kind of thrill that feels like falling in love, even when you know, deep down, it's something else. The rush in your chest, the electricity in your fingertips, the way the world sharpens and blurs all at once. Adrenaline masquerading as affection. It's intoxicating, addictive, and blindingly persuasive. You cling to it, chase it, call it romance or connection or meaning, when in truth, it's simply the mind's desperate attempt to feel alive in a world where stability now feels hollow, even frightening. This is the paradox of highs without anchors, a secret, compulsive reflex of consciousness that craves the chemical rush of intensity, because anything quieter feels like a slow death. You confuse adrenaline with affection because you've forgotten how to trust peace. Calm feels like absence. Security feels like numbness. Only the wild spike of emotion, the vertigo of the next crisis, feels like proof you still exist at all. Maybe it started as survival. Perhaps, once upon a time, you needed those surges, the pounding heart, the dazzling highs, the plunges into drama, to break free of something that threatened to suffocate you. Or maybe you were taught, subtly, that real life is supposed to be loud and chaotic, that love is meant to be a storm. Over time, the adrenaline became a substitute for warmth, for comfort, for intimacy. You learned to interpret the pounding rush as love's heartbeat, and so you sought out situations, relationships, even fantasies that would provide the jolt, the spark, the wild, spinning ride. And in a way, it worked, until it didn't. Because adrenaline always fades, the thrill always levels out. And what's left then? The emptiness you never learned to befriend. The silence that reminds you how much of your life has been spent riding the roller coaster, refusing to step off. Stability in this world feels not just unfamiliar, but unbearable. Stillness seems to mock you. Boredom is a threat. Even the gentle, honest love of a quiet day seems suspect. Because where's the rush? Where's the proof that your heart still knows how to beat? You might catch yourself sabotaging calm, picking fights, chasing impossible relationships, inventing crises where none exist. You might feel your energy spike around unpredictable people, or in moments of risk, while genuine affection, steady, consistent, patient, makes you want to run. These are not conscious choices. They're echoes of a mind rewired by too much chaos, too much uncertainty. The body craves the hormone surge. The heart is trained to fear the void. It's a pattern found in people who grew up on edge, whose earliest memories were formed in turbulence, not peace. Or in those whose losses taught them to distrust calm, because calm is the silence before the next storm. It's found in those who have lived too long in survival mode, who have spent years proving their own aliveness through extremes, never letting themselves rest, always searching for the next spike of sensation. And so, affection becomes a byproduct of adrenaline, and anything less feels not just boring, but wrong. But there's another, deeper layer to this. Sometimes, when you live in the shadow of highs without anchors, it's not just habit or trauma. It's because on some level, you sense that the narrative thread of your life has already snapped. The timeline dissolved, the story ended, and now you're left drifting, running on emotional inertia. The adrenaline, the thrill, the chaos, they are not signs of vitality, but echoes of a consciousness that's terrified to stop. Because to stop would mean admitting there's nothing left to anchor you. Every high is a denial of the void. Every wild heartbeat is a plea for meaning in the silence that follows. This is why it feels so impossible to rest. Why you distrust the good days, question the gentle loves, recoil from anything that doesn't jolt you awake. Stillness whispers of endings. Calm reminds you how easily things can vanish. In the quiet, you hear the faint echo of the truth you can't bear. That you're already living in the afterglow, the slow fade, the postscript. And so you run, toward intensity, toward drama, toward anyone or anything that will spark that primal surge, that proof that you're still here. But the high, unanchored, always ends. And each time, the landing is harder. The emptiness grows. The difference between love and adrenaline becomes harder to find. You wonder if you're broken, if you'll ever be able to let yourself be held in peace. The truth is, it's not your fault. It's not a weakness. It's simply the shape your survival took in a world where certainty vanished and only sensation could fill the void. If you're tired of the ride, if you long for the quiet you've always fled, know this. Stability is not emptiness, and calm is not death. They are not proof of absence, but the soil where real connection, real affection, can finally take root. If you're willing to let the rush fade, if you're brave enough to step off the roller coaster and stand in the silence, trusting that you will not disappear. Maybe that's the final lesson of highs without anchors. That true presence isn't measured by the size of the adrenaline surge, but by the willingness to remain, even when the world is quiet and the heart is still. To trust that you're real, not because you feel the rush, but because you are, even in the hush between storms. Chains called loyalty. You call it loyalty. That's the word you use when someone asks why you stay, why you follow, while you bend yourself into shapes that barely resemble the person you used to be. You say it softly, almost proudly, as if it's a badge you've earned, proof of your devotion, loyalty. It sounds noble, almost heroic, a shining chain that binds you to someone or something greater than yourself. But deep down, in the quiet places you never speak of, you know it's more complicated than that, because loyalty, for you, has become another name for submission. Not the healthy kind, not the kind that comes from trust and mutual respect, but the kind that wears you down year after year until the act of choosing is just a memory. You tell yourself it's about honor, about keeping your word, about never giving up on the people or causes you care about. But if you're honest, truly honest, you know you stopped choosing long ago. Somewhere along the way, your loyalty became a reflex, a default, a cage. You remember how it started. Maybe it was in childhood, when love and approval were rationed out like rewards for good behavior. You learned to watch for the smallest signs, an approving nod, a rare smile, a door left open just for you. You learned that the safest way to hold on to those precious moments was to be good, to be loyal, to do what was expected without complaint. Your first vows were silent ones. I will not disappoint. I will not leave. I will not be the reason someone walks away. As you grew, the vows grew too, louder, more elaborate. You made promises to friends, to family, to lovers, to leaders. Each one a tiny link, forged in hope but hardened by fear. You stayed even when you were tired. You said yes when you meant no. You forgave when you wanted to fight. And every time you silenced your own voice in service of someone else's need, the chain grew heavier, the links tighter. You told yourself this was strength, that only the weak abandon their posts, that only cowards break their promises. You wrapped yourself in the mythology of loyalty, the soldier who never deserts, the lover who never strays, the friend who always stands by. You looked at those who walked away and pitied them, or maybe envied them, but you never allowed yourself to become one of them. You clung to your post, to your duty, because the alternative was unthinkable. But underneath the pride, the truth gnaws at you. You know that your loyalty is not just about love or principle. It's about fear, the raw, consuming fear of being left behind, the terror of being abandoned, unchosen, forgotten. You stay because leaving would mean facing the vast emptiness that waits on the other side of loyalty, the silence where no one calls your name, the darkness where no one reaches for your hand. And so, you disguise your fear behind the language of vows. You talk about sacrifice, about endurance, about weathering storms together. But the storms never end, and the sacrifices never seem to matter. The more you give, the more is expected. The more you prove yourself, the more invisible you become. Until one day, you realize you are no longer serving love or duty. You are serving fear. You are worshiping at the altar of not being left. You begin to notice the ways your submission is rewarded, the subtle praise for being reliable, for never complaining, for being the one everyone can count on. You realize that loyalty is currency, and you have become very rich in it, but poor in freedom, in selfhood, in joy. You wonder what it would feel like to choose something for yourself, to walk away, to say enough, and mean it. But the fear is always there. It whispers that if you break the chain, you will lose everything. The approval, the belonging, the fragile sense of worth that comes from being needed. It tells you that loyalty is all you have, all you are, and so you stay. And the chain tightens, and your world grows smaller. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of who you might be without these chains. Someone lighter, someone braver, someone willing to risk loneliness for the chance to be real. You imagine yourself stepping outside the boundaries of expectation, letting go of the need to please, the need to stay. For a moment, it feels possible. For a moment, you are free. But freedom is frightening. The open door beckons, but so does the familiar comfort of the cage. You return to the language of loyalty, to the old vows, to the well-worn paths of submission. You tell yourself that you are choosing, but in your heart, you know the truth. A choice made in fear is not a choice at all. And yet, in this struggle, there is hope. Because you are beginning to see the difference, to feel the weight of every link in the chain, to question the stories you've told yourself about what it means to be loyal. You realize that true loyalty does not demand your silence, your submission, your erasure. True loyalty is rooted in choice, in mutual respect, in the freedom to say yes or no. You start slowly to test the boundaries. You say what you mean, even when your voice shakes. You set small limits, draw faint lines, claim tiny spaces as your own. It's terrifying. But with each act of courage, the chain grows lighter. You begin to believe that you can be loyal and free, that you can love without losing yourself, that you can choose to stay and choose if needed to leave. Tonight, as you sit in the quiet, let yourself feel the weight of the chains called loyalty. Name them for what they are. See the fear beneath the vows, the longing beneath the submission, and ask yourself, who would you be if you trusted that you could never be abandoned by yourself? In the end, real loyalty is not the chain that binds you to others, but the promise you make to honor your own heart, to stay or to go by your own choosing, to serve love, not fear, to claim your freedom and let the world adjust. This is the courage you have always carried, the key that was never truly lost. Withering for bloom. Sometimes you start with the best of intentions. You love someone so much, maybe a partner, a friend, a parent, that you do almost anything to see them happy. At first, it's small. You let them choose the restaurant, the movie, the conversation topic. You bite your tongue when you want to speak, just to keep the peace. You let your own opinions slide away, telling yourself it's just compromise, it's just kindness. But kindness can become something darker when it demands that you shrink for someone else's comfort. When you begin to wither so another can bloom, you lose sight of where compromise ends and self-erasure begins. It's so easy not to notice at first. You're praised for being supportive, for being flexible, for putting their needs first. You watch their confidence grow, their voice get louder, their smile widen. They take up more space in every room. People comment on how much they shine with you by their side. And quietly, without even realizing it, you start to disappear. You laugh a little less. You stop mentioning what bothers you. You ignore the things that used to bring you joy, just to avoid drawing attention away from their moment in the sun. Every relationship has give and take, but this is different. This is give and give until there's nothing left of you to offer but your absence. You watch their ego unfurl, blossoming in all the places where you once grew. Their pride takes root in the silences you maintain. Their happiness feeds on your willingness to step back, to hush your own needs. You become the soil for their self-importance, the quiet gardener who pulls out their own petals so the other can feel like the only flower in the field. You tell yourself it's love. That real love means sacrifice, that good partners, good friends, good children make space for others to grow. But what happens when that space is carved out of your own sense of self? What happens when the only way for them to thrive is for you to wilt in the shadows? There are kinds of love that demand you shrink, that only flourish if you become invisible. And the cost is your aliveness, your voice, your right to take up space in your own life. You see it in little things. You stop sharing your achievements because they might feel threatened or overshadowed. You stop dressing the way you like because your style is too much. You apologize for your ambitions, your laughter, your presence. You become careful, quiet, always calculating how to keep their ego fed and never risk their resentment. You turn yourself into a supporting character in a story where you once dreamed of being the hero. In public, they glow while you dim. People see you as devoted, loyal, selfless. But they don't see how you flinch when you start to speak and they cut you off. How you swallow disappointments that gather like stones in your chest. How your world narrows day by day as you prune away pieces of yourself for their comfort, their security, their confidence. You find yourself agreeing with things you don't believe, laughing at jokes that hurt, pretending to be fine when you are anything but. There's a loneliness in this kind of love, a bone-deep isolation that comes from knowing that your presence is only valued when it makes you smaller, that your greatest act of devotion is to vanish, bit by bit, until the person you loved is surrounded by all the space you left behind. You become a ghost in your own life, haunting the edges of their happiness, hoping for a moment where you might be seen, might be chosen, might be allowed to grow. But the truth is, love should never require your disappearance. The real bloom of love is not a garden where only one flower is allowed to thrive. It's a wild field, messy and bright, where every voice is heard, Every color shines. Every root is allowed to dig deep. True partnership is not about taking turns being invisible. It's about growing together, making space for both light and shade, giving and receiving in ways that nourish rather than deplete. If you find yourself withering for someone else's bloom, ask yourself, when was the last time you felt fully present in your own life? When did you last say what you meant? Ask for what you needed. Let yourself take up space without apology. What would it feel like to stand tall, even if it meant casting a shadow? To risk being noticed, even if it disrupts the fragile balance you've worked so hard to maintain? It's terrifying, stepping out of the shadows. You worry you'll be called selfish, difficult, ungrateful. You worry they'll shrink away from your light, resent your return, try to coax you back into silence. But you cannot nurture someone else's soul at the cost of your own. Love that asks you to disappear is not love. It's hunger. It's fear. It's the slow erasure of all you were meant to be. You deserve to bloom too, to fill the space around you with color and scent, with laughter and song, with dreams that belong only to you. You deserve to be loved for all that you are, not just for how well you can vanish. The right people will celebrate your presence, not resent it. They will want you to grow, not shrink. They will bloom beside you, not at your expense. So step back into the light. Let your needs be seen. Speak your truth. Even if your voice shakes, let yourself be wild, whole, alive. And remember, the greatest gardens are not those with a single flower, but those where every living thing is allowed to bloom. Saving as purpose. There's a certain kind of person who wakes up every morning with a silent question pressing at the edge of their mind. Who needs me today? They move through the world scanning for suffering, listening for pain in the voices around them, watching for disappointment, searching for the wounded, the lost, the broken. It's not just empathy. It's a compulsion, a deep need to fix, to heal, to be the difference between despair and hope for someone else. This is the trap of saving as purpose, a life built around redeeming others, even when no one asked to be saved, and slowly, quietly, forgetting who you are when you're not someone else's hero. Maybe it began as love, a desire to ease a friend's heartbreak, to help a parent through a dark time, to keep a partner afloat when their world was sinking. There's a beautiful ache in making someone feel seen, safe, whole. For a while it works. You listen, you comfort, you patch up their wounds, you become the one they call in crisis, the steady voice at the other end of the line, the arms that hold them together. You get good at reading sadness, at anticipating needs before they're spoken. You learn to carry the burden that no one else wants to hold. But beneath the warmth, a subtle poison creeps in. The more you define yourself by your ability to save, the less you remember how to just be. You stop asking what you want, what you need, what you love, because those questions feel selfish, or maybe empty. The approval, the gratitude, the sense of being needed becomes your oxygen. Your self-worth gets tied to the project of fixing someone else, of redeeming a pain that might not even be yours to heal. And what happens when the person you're trying to save doesn't want your help? What if their pain is not a problem to be solved, but simply part of their journey, their story, their becoming? You find yourself pushing, prodding, begging them to see the light, to change, to get better. Every setback feels like your failure. Every refusal, a rejection of you. The harder you try, the more they resist. Your identity, built on being the hero, starts to crack. The world is full of these silent saviors, the partner who stays through years of chaos, believing they alone can heal the wounds that came before. The friend who becomes therapist and fixer, forgetting to share their own pain. The child who learns too early to be the adult, to shoulder their parents' sorrow. Each one trapped by the illusion that their love, their care, their sacrifice will be enough to save someone who never asked to be saved. But the truth is, the project of saving someone else is endless. There is always more pain, more healing, more brokenness. The needs expand to fill the space you give them. Your own needs shrink, disappear, become invisible even to you. One day you look in the mirror and realize you don't recognize the person staring back. You know their skills, their strategies, their compassion, but not their dreams, not their joys, not their true self. Worse still, you may begin to resent the person you're trying to help. Their pain becomes an obstacle to your sense of meaning. If they heal, you lose your purpose. If they don't, you feel like a failure. You become trapped in a loop, giving more, helping harder, burning yourself down to keep them warm, until all that's left is exhaustion and confusion. Your kindness, once so pure, now feels heavy, transactional, even desperate. There are moments late at night when the house is quiet, when you wonder, who am I if I am not saving someone? You may feel panic, emptiness, the hollow ache of a life spent in someone else's shadow. You may try to fill it with new projects, new people to help, new crises to solve, but the cycle repeats, and your own sense of self grows thinner, quieter, fading behind the endless work of redemption. What's so difficult to admit is that saving others can be a way to avoid saving yourself. It's easier to pour love and energy into someone else's wounds than to face your own. It's easier to control their pain than to acknowledge your helplessness, your loneliness, your fear of being unwanted when you're not needed. The identity of the savior is safe, even if it's suffocating, because as long as you're fixing, you don't have to be vulnerable. You don't have to ask for help. You don't have to risk being seen as someone who needs to be saved. But true healing, real connection, doesn't come from rescuing, but from meeting each other as equals, from letting others have their pain, their process, their power, from learning to hold space for someone's struggle without making it your own purpose. It's terrifying to step back, to watch someone you love hurt, to know you can't fix it. But in that space, you make room for your own becoming, for discovering who you are when you're not someone's project, someone's crutch, someone's savior. Maybe the hardest thing is learning to let go, to offer help, but not demand that it be accepted, to love, but not to lose yourself, to witness pain, but not make it the center of your existence. It means turning inward, asking the questions you've avoided. What do I want? What do I need? Who am I when I am not rescuing anyone? The answers may be slow, uncertain, even painful, but they are yours. So, next time you feel the urge to rush in, to fix, to redeem, pause. Ask yourself if you are saving them, or saving yourself from the emptiness of not being needed. Notice what happens when you sit in the discomfort, when you let others walk their own path, when you focus on your own heart. You may find, beneath the habit of heroism, a person worthy of love not for what they fix, but for who they truly are. Because in the end, your purpose is not to save the world, or even one person who never asked for it. Your purpose is to live, fully and honestly, to find meaning beyond the mirror of someone else's pain. Only then can you offer real help, help that's free, unburdened, and true. Only then can you reclaim yourself and let the world be as it is, broken, beautiful, and sometimes beyond your saving. Storms of repetition. You tell yourself every fight is different. The faces, the words, the reasons, all new. But when the shouting dies down and silence returns, a nagging realization takes root. This storm feels familiar. The names change, the details blur, but underneath it's the same thunder, the same lightning, the same ache that comes after. You convince yourself that this is passion, that these outbursts mean you care, that each battle is necessary, righteous, proof that something still burns between you. But the truth is simpler, quieter, harder to accept. You are caught in storms of repetition, fights dressed in different costumes, cycling again and again, each one leaving you more worn than before. You remember the first time it happened, the argument that felt like it would tear the world open, the rush of adrenaline, the pounding heart, the way your hands shook as you spoke your truth. Maybe you believed you were finally being heard. Maybe you thought the other person was finally seeing you, finally understanding the depth of your feelings. For a moment, it was electric. Painful, yes, but alive. Then came the apology, the late-night promise, the hope that next time things would be different. But next time always comes. Maybe it's a week later, maybe it's months, but it comes. And somehow, despite all the words, all the tears, all the desperate attempts to change, the script is unchanged. You find yourself on the same stage, under the same storm clouds, acting out the same scene. The grievances are familiar, the wounds are tender in the same places. The outcome is already written. Even as you shout, you know how it will end. Exhaustion, regret, an uneasy truce that feels more like surrender. You wonder why it keeps happening. Is it fate? Is it your fault? Is it theirs? You try to be better. You read the books, learn the communication strategies, practice deep breathing and mindful listening. But when the tension rises, instinct takes over. The same triggers, the same accusations, the same desperate need to be right, to be seen, to win. You watch yourself from the outside, voice rising, hands gesturing, eyes hard. Even as you act, you are already tired, already mourning the peace you know you'll have to rebuild. There's a comfort in repetition, even when it hurts, a strange sense of purpose in the storm. The chaos makes you feel alive, necessary, essential. It reminds you that you're still here, still fighting, still feeling something in a world that sometimes goes numb. But passion is not the same as purpose, and chaos is not the same as connection. The storm that once felt like proof now drains you, little by little, until you're left hollow, spent, wondering how much more of yourself you can give before there's nothing left to rebuild. You might blame the other person, say they never listen, never change, never care enough to meet you halfway. Or you blame yourself, too demanding, too sensitive, too quick to light the fuse. The truth is usually somewhere in between. The storm lives between you, fed by old hurts, fueled by misunderstandings, kept alive by the belief that every fight is new, every battle is necessary, every explosion is a sign that you're still alive. But over time, the patterns become impossible to ignore. You hear yourself using the same phrases, watching the same expressions flicker across the face of someone you love, feeling the same ache in your chest. The cycle is a trap, a feedback loop that grows tighter each time. You start to fear the calm, to distrust moments of peace, to brace for the thunder even on clear days. Sometimes, you try to break the cycle. You bite your tongue, swallow your pride, walk away when you want to shout. But the pressure builds elsewhere, in small resentments, in words unspoken, in distance that grows until another storm is inevitable. You miss the old intensity, but you also dread it. You want connection without destruction, intimacy without chaos, but you don't know how to find it. You only know how to burn and rebuild, each time a little less certain the structure will hold. Friends and family notice the scars, the tiredness in your eyes, the way you flinch at certain words. They ask why you stay, why you fight, why you return to the storm when you could walk away. You don't have an answer, or maybe the answer is too painful to say out loud. The storm is familiar, and sometimes familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar peace. You tell yourself you'll leave after the next fight, or the one after that. But the cycle is patient. It knows how to wait. It knows your patterns better than you do. There are quiet nights after the storm, when you lie awake and replay every word, every accusation, every apology. You promise yourself it will be different next time, that you'll be gentler, softer, that you'll listen more and shout less. But the patterns are deep, the ruts well-worn, the script memorized. Even love can't always overwrite what pain has etched into your bones. So, you weather another storm, and another. You mistake the lightning for love, the thunder for intimacy. You convince yourself that the repetition is proof you still care, but each storm takes a little more from you, leaves you a little emptier, a little further from the peace you crave but cannot trust. Until one day, you look around and realize the house you've rebuilt so many times is just smoke and ashes, and the storm is all that's left. You tell yourself every fight is different, but deep down, you know the truth. You are caught in storms of repetition, circling the same pain in new disguises, believing passion is measured by the wreckage left behind. And until you break the pattern, until you choose peace over proof, connection over chaos, the storms will keep coming, and your spirit will keep drifting further and further from the calm you secretly need. Bones of old promises. There's a peculiar ache in the way we hold on to old promises. The world moves on, faces change, love unspools into distance or silence, and yet, deep inside, we clutch the relics of what was once sacred. Vows whispered under trembling breath, secret oaths written on scraps of paper, rings and tokens hidden in drawers. These become fossils, ossified remnants of an ancient self, and we can't let them go. Why? Because somewhere inside, we've convinced ourselves that the mere fact of history, the age, the endurance, the sheer weight of time, somehow transforms decay into something noble, something beautiful, something worth keeping. You might catch yourself returning to a memory that no longer feels warm, but you go there anyway. You remember the promises you made, or the ones made to you, long after their truth has crumbled. The laughter is gone, the sweetness dried up, and all that remains is the hollow echo of obligation. Yet still, you hold fast. There's a stubbornness here, a refusal to admit that what has died should be allowed to vanish, as if honoring the corpse of love is braver than burying it. Sometimes, it's not even about the person you once loved. It's about the identity those promises gave you. To break them would mean breaking the chain of memory that tethers you to who you once were. You tell yourself that loyalty to the past is a virtue, that endurance is proof of character. And so you walk through the ruins, dusting off the bones of old vows, parading them as evidence that you once mattered enough to make them. You mistake the persistence of memory for the persistence of meaning. It happens in all corners of life. The marriage that's become a mausoleum, the friendship that exists only in annual texts, the career built on aspirations you no longer recognize. You keep showing up, performing the ritual of old promises, feeding the skeletons with your attention, because to stop would mean admitting the decay. You treat the past as a living thing, when it's really just a graveyard, a monument to what once lived and now lingers, brittle but unyielding. Sometimes you even fear what might happen if you let go. Would you become someone unrecognizable, someone rootless, someone unmoored from the long chain of devotion and sacrifice that defines you? The truth is, you're already drifting. Every day spent clinging to these bones is a day spent in denial, embalming the dead with the language of honor and tradition. And yet, there's something almost heroic in the refusal to move on. The world worships newness, quick fixes, easy endings. To keep your vows, to keep tending the remains of love, is to say, I was here. I made a promise, and I will not forget it, even if the other person already has. Even if time itself is begging me to let go. But deep down, you know the cost. The weight grows heavier, the bones more brittle. You start to live in a museum curated by your former self, haunting halls lined with artifacts from a time when everything still felt possible. The air becomes thick with regret and what-ifs. You find yourself defending the skeletons, insisting they are still alive, long after everyone else has stopped pretending. Sometimes, late at night, you wonder if it's courage or cowardice that keeps you here. Is it loyalty or fear of what comes next? Are you preserving something sacred or just hiding from the truth that everything beautiful eventually dies? The answer is both and neither. It's the strange human instinct to believe that suffering for history's sake is the same as meaning, that decay itself is proof of love. But there's a darker side to this devotion. The bones of old promises cannot offer warmth or comfort. They demand tribute, your energy, your hope, your chance at new beginnings. As long as you worship them, you cannot move forward. You cannot create new love, or new vows, or new dreams, because your hands are full of fossils and your heart is full of ghosts. And still, you linger. Because letting go feels like betrayal. Because decay is familiar, and history is heavy, and the fear of emptiness is stronger than the hope for something new. You stand among the ruins, mistaking the stubborn ache for loyalty, mistaking the pain for love. You preserve the bones, convinced they are worth more than they weigh, but maybe, just maybe, the real act of courage is to bury them, to thank the old promises for what they gave you and let them rest at last, to walk out of the graveyard and risk living again, not because history demands it, but because life always, stubbornly, insists on growing out of the dust. Maybe love is not proven by how long you can clutch the skeletons, but by how bravely you can set them down and turn to face the sun, empty-handed, ready for something living and new. Cold, familiar warmth. You tell yourself it's not that bad, that the silence isn't really cold, that the glance that never lingers isn't truly wounding. You come home to a familiar chill, one you've learned to wear like a second skin. The room is neither hostile nor welcoming, just indifferent. Words pass between you, necessary and perfunctory, never brushing the deeper places you ache to share. You move around each other like ghosts haunting the same old ground, close but never quite touching. And still, you stay. You tell yourself this is comfort, that this is what you know, and the comfort of what you know always feels safer than the risk of what you don't. You remember the first time you felt it, that cold, familiar warmth. Maybe it was a parent who looked through you, a friend who never truly listened, a partner whose touch grew rarer with each passing season. At first, it stung. You tried to melt the ice with laughter, with patience, with hope. But slowly you adjusted. You learned to take scraps and call them sustenance. You convinced yourself that if you just worked harder, waited longer, made yourself smaller, their warmth might someday return. But the room never changed. And after a while, neither did you. There's a strange relief in indifference. It's predictable. It doesn't ask much. The chill, once shocking, becomes a steady temperature you know how to survive. There are no wild swings, no dizzying hope followed by heartbreak. Just a steady, manageable ache. A cold that never kills, but never quite lets you live either. You convince yourself this is maturity, that real love is about endurance, not fire, that safety is the highest prize, even if it means never feeling truly alive. You see glimpses of something different elsewhere, a friend's easy laughter, the casual tenderness of strangers, the way some people risk everything to reach for more. Sometimes, you imagine what it would be like to step into that unknown warmth, to risk being seen and hurt and changed. But the idea frightens you. You think of all the ways you might be disappointed, the ways you could be left behind or let down. The cold you know feels kinder than the warmth you don't. You go back again and again to what is familiar, to the silent meals, the brief touches that mean nothing, the conversations that never go past the surface. You let yourself believe that this is enough, that you are lucky just to have someone beside you, even if they never really let you in. You ignore the part of you that remembers what it was like to hope, what it was like to want more. You wrap the indifference around you like a worn blanket, faded and threadbare, but still yours. There are moments when the mask slips, a birthday forgotten, a crisis endured alone, a secret you long to share but keep locked inside. You realize then just how deep the cold runs, how even your most vulnerable moments are met with little more than a passing glance. You mourn quietly for the warmth you have never known, for the fire you were told to fear. You remember what it was like to feel your heart beat faster, to dream of a love that would meet you in your wildest places, and you wonder if that was ever real. Sometimes you blame yourself. You think maybe you're too much or not enough. Maybe you asked for too much or failed to give what was needed. You try to fix yourself, to shrink your needs to fit the smallness of the space you've been given. You become an expert at asking for nothing, at celebrating crumbs, at finding ways to explain away the absence of warmth. It's easier to adapt than to leave, easier to numb yourself than to risk the unknown. You know others have left. You hear stories of people who dared to walk away, who chose the terror of loneliness over the ache of being unseen. You envy their courage, but cannot imagine it for yourself. You worry that the world outside will be colder still, that no one will care, that you will long for the comfort of indifference and find only emptiness. The devil you know, you whisper. Better the cold, familiar warmth than the chill of the unfamiliar. But the truth is, the cold you have chosen is still a kind of hunger. It is the ache of unmet needs, the slow suffocation of dreams deferred. It is the fear that you will never be loved for who you truly are, that you must settle for being tolerated instead of cherished. It is a life lived in half-light, a compromise that keeps you safe but never lets you soar. One day you may find yourself standing at a crossroads, the door open, the world outside bright and wild and full of risks. You will feel the old fear, the old ache, the deep longing to stay where it's safe and known. But you will also feel something else, a tiny ember. A spark that remembers what it was like to hope, to reach for more, to want warmth that burns instead of chills. It will be your choice then, to remain in the cold, familiar warmth, to keep calling safety love and indifference devotion, or to step out into the unknown, trembling and alive, ready to risk your heart for the chance at something real. The path won't be easy. The world may wound you. You may return, more than once, to the comfort of what you know. But each step you take toward warmth is a promise to yourself, a vow that you will not settle for less than a life that lets you feel. Tonight, as you sit in the quiet, notice the chill around you. Ask yourself what you are truly afraid of. What is waiting for you, out there, beyond the walls of the familiar? You may find that what you fear is not the cold, but the courage to walk into the warmth. And maybe, just maybe, That courage is the beginning of a new kind of safety, one that comes from being fully alive, fully seen, and fully loved, even if it means leaving the cold behind forever. Explosions named honesty. Some people say honesty is the highest form of love. They claim that truth is the backbone of intimacy, that nothing good can grow in the dark. But there's a shadow side to this virtue, a place where honesty becomes a weapon, where the very thing meant to heal and connect is sharpened into something that divides and destroys. Sometimes, what you call honesty is really just an explosion waiting to happen. Words packed tight with anger, fear, or disappointment, then lobbed into the center of a relationship and called necessary. These are explosions named honesty, and they're more common than most of us care to admit. It starts with a moment of frustration or vulnerability, a wound you can't hide anymore. Maybe you've been holding on to resentment for too long, bottling up your needs, your insecurities, your pain. The pressure builds, and when it finally erupts, you reach for the language of truth. You say, "I'm just being honest," or "I need to be real with you," as if the act of speaking gives you the right to unleash whatever's inside. You dress your words in the costume of vulnerability, but beneath the surface, what you really want is impact, a reaction, a shift in the balance of power, a mark that says, "Now you know how I feel." This isn't intimacy. This is ammunition. You hurl your truths like grenades, not to be understood, but to be heard, to make the other person flinch. Maybe you even convince yourself that you're being brave, that this is what authentic connection requires. But deep down, real honesty is not designed to wound. It's not meant to leave scars. The most dangerous lies are not always the ones we tell others. They're the stories we spin for ourselves. The excuses that turn cruelty into righteousness, callousness into courage. You see this in arguments that spiral out of control. One person admits a fear, and the other counters with a confession meant to one-up, to hurt, to win. You watch as each vulnerability is stripped of tenderness and turned into leverage. The phrase, "I'm just being honest," becomes a shield against criticism, a way to dodge responsibility for the damage your words inflict. The line between sharing and shattering grows blurry, and soon, the only thing left is the echo of raised voices, the rubble of trust. But the most insidious explosions are quiet. They don't always come in shouting matches or dramatic ultimatums. Sometimes, they slip into the conversation like poison, subtle and slow. A pointed observation about someone's flaws, delivered under the guise of just wanting what's best. A cold truth dropped into the middle of a warm moment. A confession timed for maximum impact, designed to destabilize, to unsettle, to prove a point. These moments masquerade as intimacy, but their purpose is domination, not connection. We live in a culture that prizes bluntness, that equates honesty with virtue, but honesty without compassion is brutality. Vulnerability without care is sabotage. When you use the truth to win arguments, to control outcomes, to punish or shame, you turn your deepest self into shrapnel, scattering pieces of your pain into the people you claim to love. Why do we do this? Why are we tempted to weaponize the very thing that could save us? Sometimes it's fear. Fear that if we don't speak first, we'll be hurt instead. Sometimes it's habit, a learned response from childhood, from past relationships, from watching others fight and call it love. Sometimes it's the desperate need to feel powerful when we feel small, to control when everything else feels out of control. Honesty in these moments is a last defense, a way of making sure no one can surprise us, because we've already fired the first shot. But the damage lingers. The wounds created by honest explosions are slow to heal because they are rooted in betrayal, the betrayal of what honesty was supposed to mean. The next time you want to open up, you hesitate. You wonder if your vulnerability will be used against you. You hold back, and so does the other person, until intimacy becomes a game of chicken, each side waiting for the other to put down their arms. There is a different kind of honesty, the kind that isn't explosive, that doesn't require casualties. It's the honesty that comes with gentleness, with curiosity, with the willingness to be wrong, to be changed. It's the kind of truth that isn't about winning, but about understanding. Not about power, but about presence. This honesty is terrifying in its own way, because it demands that you lower your guard, that you sit in the discomfort of someone else's truth as well as your own. It is patient. It is kind. It is never dressed as ammunition. If you recognize yourself in these explosions, If you've thrown words like daggers and called it honesty, know that you are not alone. Everyone has felt the urge to hurt when they are hurting, to make noise when they feel unheard. But the real test is whether you can tell the difference between truth that heals and truth that wounds. Whether you can catch yourself before the explosion and ask, is this honesty or is this anger in disguise? Am I trying to connect or am I trying to conquer? Love does not grow in craters. Trust is not built from ashes. If you want intimacy, you must risk gentleness, risk being misunderstood, risk letting the truth land softly instead of letting it detonate. This is not weakness. It is the rarest courage, the hardest skill. To be honest and also kind, to be vulnerable and also safe, to speak your truth, not as ammunition, but as an invitation. So the next time you reach for honesty, pause. Hold your words in your hand and feel their weight. Ask yourself, will this build or will it break? Will this deepen connection or scorch the earth between us? Because explosions are easy. Anyone can ignite a fuse. But to heal, to create, to truly love, that requires a kind of honesty that doesn't destroy, but transforms. Masks of perfection. You wake up, and before you've even opened your eyes, your mind is assembling the mask. Maybe it's subtle, an extra smile, a practiced joke, a tone that softens your real thoughts until they're safe and acceptable. Maybe it's so practiced you don't even notice the shift. You check your phone, scroll through the filtered highlights of other people's lives, feel that quiet pressure rising in your chest, the demand to perform, to meet expectations, to be someone just a little more than you really are. This is the world of masks of perfection, where you offer the fantasy they want and let your true self drift further out of reach, trading pieces of authenticity for approval until the reflection in your mirror is a stranger. It starts early. Maybe it's the first time you see someone's face light up because you did what they hoped. Maybe it's the first time you're ignored for speaking your truth, but praised for following the script. You learn to read the room like a weather report. What do they want? Who should I be? What parts of me are safe to show and which must stay hidden? The mask becomes your passport. With it, you're loved, accepted, envied. Without it, you risk rejection, disappointment, invisibility. At first, it's a small sacrifice. You hold back a harsh opinion. You exaggerate your enthusiasm. You nod when you want to shake your head. But soon the rewards stack up. Applause, affection, promotions, invitations. You become the perfect student, the model friend, the reliable partner, the ideal child. You collect approval like badges. Each time you earn one, you feel a rush, a jolt of belonging, of safety. But the mask is hungry. It asks for more. With time, it's not enough to act. You must become the role. Your imperfections, doubts, wild hopes, and quiet sorrows are edited out. You laugh at jokes you hate, say yes when you want to say no, become an echo of their desires. If you're the achiever, you chase every goal they set for you, terrified of slipping. If you're the caretaker, you bury your needs under theirs, hoping that being needed will make you lovable. If you're the rebel, you exaggerate your defiance, even when you long for comfort. Every role is a costume, worn so long the seams dig into your skin. But the price is subtle and brutal. You start to lose track of the real you, the one with messy feelings, awkward truths, offbeat dreams. Each day you polish the mask, perfecting the image, until your own reflection seems slightly off. You look in the mirror and feel a flicker of panic. Who is that? When did I become this well-rehearsed stranger? And yet, the applause is addictive. The approval fills the hollow for a while. You tell yourself you're just fitting in, just doing what you have to do. But inside, the voice grows quieter. You wonder what would happen if you dropped the act. Would they still love you, respect you, choose you? Or would they turn away, disappointed that you're not the fantasy they created? Real life is full of these stories. The student who hides anxiety behind straight A's, the friend who never shares their real struggles, the influencer whose feed is all smiles, but whose nights are sleepless, the parent who keeps every family secret, the lover who agrees to everything, afraid that honesty will shatter the dream. Some even start believing the mask is all there is, until it cracks under stress, heartbreak, exhaustion, or the raw need to finally be seen. Sometimes, the body revolts before the mind does. You get sick, tired, anxious. Your moods swing wildly. You feel empty, even when surrounded by admirers. The energy it takes to perform perfection drains you, but you keep going because the alternative, being ordinary, flawed, real, feels like falling without a net. What they don't tell you is that perfection is a prison. Every act of pretending draws the bars closer. Each compliment on your mask feels hollow, because deep down, you know it's not you they see, but the role you play. You become terrified of being found out, exposed as messy, as disappointing, as human. The more you hide, the lonelier you become. Yet, the world keeps rewarding the mask. You might even reach the top, admired, envied, praised for your flawless image. But at night, when you take off the mask and face yourself in the dark, the emptiness echoes louder. The person behind the perfection becomes harder to remember. You feel haunted by the question, if they knew the real me, would anyone stay? The truth is, authenticity is risk. To show your true self, to drop the mask and let your flaws breathe, means facing possible rejection, judgment, even loss. But it also means giving yourself the chance to be truly loved, truly seen, truly alive. It means reclaiming the parts of you that you buried for applause. Recovery from the masks of perfection isn't easy. It begins with small acts of honesty, a real opinion, a refusal, a confession of struggle. Each step feels terrifying at first, but also freeing. You discover which people love you for who you really are, and which only loved the fantasy. You feel grief for all the time lost behind the mask, and relief at the simplicity of being enough. The mirror grows clearer. Your own face, with its flaws and depth and private strength, returns. Maybe the world's applause is quieter. Maybe you lose some approval. But the warmth you gain is real. It is yours. And it cannot be taken away by someone else's mood or desire. So the next time you feel the mask tightening, the pressure to be perfect rising in your chest, pause. Ask yourself what you want, who you are when the performance ends, and what kind of love is worth living for. Trade perfection for authenticity, approval for self-respect, applause for truth. And in the end, meet your own eyes in the mirror, and finally, recognize the person looking back. Entwined in scarcity, you feel it every day, the hunger, the ache, the silent tally of who gave what and when. In the beginning, love felt limitless, effortless, like a well that could never run dry. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Now, every gesture is measured, every word is weighed. You find yourself rationing affection, holding back praise, calculating comfort. You wait for the other to move first, to give more, to prove that love is still safe. But they are waiting too. Both of you are clutching scraps of intimacy, afraid to spend them, terrified of being left with nothing. You didn't mean for it to be this way. Maybe it started with a hurt, a forgotten call, a broken promise, a disappointment that lingered longer than it should. Maybe it was fear or pride or just the slow creep of exhaustion. But now it's routine. You guard your heart as if love itself is a resource that might vanish at any moment, as if one wrong move will tip the scales and leave you alone in the cold. Every touch becomes a transaction, every smile a negotiation. You wonder who will give in first, who will admit they need more, who will risk looking weak by asking for warmth. You watch the way you both keep score, who texted first, who apologized last, who offered comfort when it wasn't deserved. The numbers are never spoken aloud, but they hang in the air between you, silent judges of every interaction. You begin to notice the little withholdings, an embrace that's half-hearted, a compliment swallowed, a message left unanswered just long enough to prove a point. Affection becomes a bargaining chip, love a resource to be hoarded for leaner days. There are moments of softness, of course, flashes of what once was, a laugh that escapes, a hand that lingers. In those moments, the old abundance glimmers through, and you both remember what it felt like to trust. But the fear always returns. What if you give too much? Too soon? What if you show your hunger and it isn't met? So you ration your love, convinced that survival means never being the one who runs out first. It becomes a contest, though neither of you would ever admit it. Who can last longer without reassurance? Who can keep their heart locked down, even when it hurts? You test each other in small ways, by holding back, by pretending not to care, by waiting for the other to break the silence. Every night is a silent wager. Who will say, "I love you" first? Who will reach out, risking rejection? The cost of losing feels catastrophic, so you both keep your distance, even as you ache for closeness. Sometimes you imagine what it would be like to let go, to give without keeping score, to love without fear of running empty. But the thought terrifies you. Scarcity is familiar. Abundance feels dangerous. You've learned to survive on crumbs, to call deprivation devotion, to mistake endurance for intimacy. You tell yourself it's smart, even necessary, to be careful. But deep down, you long for a love that doesn't count, that doesn't measure, that just is. You see the toll it takes, the small resentments, the mounting loneliness, the way your laughter grows quieter, your embraces briefer, your words sharper. The contest doesn't make you stronger. It makes you brittle, suspicious, closed. You catch yourself rehearsing old arguments, preparing to defend your portion of affection, always ready to prove that you care just enough. Not too much, never too much. You watch other couples who seem to give freely, who laugh easily, who touch without hesitation. You wonder if they are naive or just lucky, or if they've found some secret you missed. You envy their ease, but you can't bring yourself to follow their example. Scarcity is a cage, but it's your cage. Letting go feels like risking everything. There are nights when you lie awake, both of you turned away, holding your own side of the bed, measuring the inches between your bodies. You think about all the words you didn't say, all the moments you could have reached across but didn't. You wonder how much longer you can last like this, surviving, but never thriving, entwined in scarcity, mistaking caution for care. You dream of a day when you can both stop counting, when you can pour out affection without fear of drought, when you can love each other like the well will never run dry. You want to believe it's possible, that love can be abundant again, that you can both learn to give without keeping score. But the contest has gone on so long, the scarcity runs so deep, you're not sure you remember how. You wake up each morning hoping for a sign, a crack in the dam, a gesture that says it's safe to give more. Sometimes it comes, a small kindness, an unexpected touch, and for a moment, hope flickers. But then the old fear returns, and you both retreat, rationing affection for another day. This is how you survive, clinging to scraps, counting every gesture, entwined in scarcity. You both lose even as you pretend to win. And until you learn to let go, to give freely, to love without fear, the contest will continue, and you will both go hungry, together but alone. Healing that hurts. There's a kind of devotion that feels like fire, steady, consuming, impossible to escape. It's the belief that the measure of your love, your worth, your loyalty is counted in the scars you collect, the wounds you let time reopen. You stay, even as the hurt grows, telling yourself that this is what real commitment means, to suffer and endure, to sacrifice your peace on the altar of a bond that demands pain as proof. This is the paradox of healing that hurts, where you confuse agony for affection and suffering becomes the only thread holding you to someone or to yourself. You see it in the quiet moments, the late-night arguments that circle back to the same old wounds. You tell yourself you're working through it, that every tear, every hollow ache is just another step toward healing. The pain is necessary, you whisper. If it didn't matter, it wouldn't hurt this much. If you could walk away, maybe you never loved deeply enough. So you stay. You sit with the ache, convincing yourself it's the glue, the proof, the thing that keeps the story alive. Pain becomes the currency of your devotion, and healing, if it comes at all, always tastes a little like loss. It's not just in love. It's in friendships that have soured but linger on out of habit and guilt. In families whose roots are tangled in old grievances, where no one dares to move on, because the pain has become the ritual that keeps them together. You see it in people who stay in jobs, in towns, in identities that no longer fit, terrified that leaving would mean betraying the suffering they've already invested. The wound is proof you were here, that you tried, that you mattered. To let it go would be to erase your own struggle, to suggest that all that pain was for nothing. So, you endure, mistaking loyalty for martyrdom. You patch the cracks with your own ache, and somewhere, deep inside, a voice insists, if you just hurt a little longer, work a little harder, things will finally be right. But what if they never are? What if the pain isn't healing you at all, but keeping you stuck? chained to an old story, locked in a loop where suffering is the only language you remember how to speak. Sometimes, the ones who love you feed this belief. They call it strength or patience or perseverance. They remind you of vows, of history, of the battles you fought together. They point to all the times you stayed and tell you it means you're strong, that your pain is sacred, your suffering noble. But pain is not always proof of love. Sometimes, it's just proof that you're afraid to let go, that you're terrified of what might remain if you finally step away from the ache. You begin to define yourself by the scars. You wear them like armor. You tell yourself the bleeding means you're alive, that you're loyal, that you know how to love better than those who walk away. But all the while, the pain hardens you. It builds walls instead of bridges. You convince yourself that happiness is shallow, that real relationships are forged in agony, that peace is a kind of betrayal. And so, healing itself becomes a threat. If the pain ends, you'll have nothing left to prove you tried. It's a lie. The truth is, love doesn't demand suffering. Commitment isn't measured in wounds. Healing doesn't have to hurt. You don't owe your happiness to the ghosts of old promises or the expectations of others. You are not the sum of your sacrifices or the weight of your grief. The bravest thing you can do isn't to stay and suffer. It's to believe that you deserve gentleness, that you can build connection without pain, that you can love and be loved without bleeding for it. Letting go of hurt isn't weakness. It's not a betrayal of all you endured. It's a choice, a decision to value yourself enough to walk away from what wounds you, to risk a life where love is soft and healing is real and commitment is measured in presence, not in scars. The glue that keeps you together is not pain, but hope. It's the quiet, stubborn belief that you can move beyond suffering, that you can build something true on the other side of heartbreak. So, if you find yourself staying only because the pain feels like proof, remember, you're allowed to leave. You're allowed to heal without hurting. You're allowed to be whole, even if that means stepping into the unknown, empty-handed, free of the weight you carried for so long. The story doesn't have to end in suffering. You can choose another ending, one where healing brings peace, not pain, and where your worth is measured not by the wounds you bear, but by the courage it took to let them finally close. Nostalgia's poisoned gift. You find yourself reaching back, again and again, into the soft glow of memory. The past draws you in with a sweetness that's almost addictive, like honey melting on your tongue. You linger on old photographs, familiar songs, the scent of rain on childhood pavement, and the laughter that echoes just out of reach. Every detail glistens with meaning, polished by the mind's careful hand. You tell yourself it was simpler then, purer. The edges of pain sanded down until what remains is only golden light and the certainty that you once belonged. Nostalgia, you think, is a gift, the mind's way of offering comfort, a soothing hand in the dark. But the comfort is never free. It arrives with a sharpness beneath the sweetness, a hidden cost that you pay with every sigh, every yearning glance backward. Because nostalgia is more than memory. It is memory rewritten, recast, romanticized, until it no longer bears the weight of the truth you once lived. It is the act of turning old wounds into legends, of transforming endings into origins, of numbing the ache of loss with stories that never quite happened the way you remember. You look back at your beginnings, the first home, the first love, the first time you laughed until you cried. You dwell on the innocence, the hope, the belief that the world was yours to shape. When endings arrive, friendships faded, promises broken, dreams lost to the slow attrition of living, you tell yourself they were inevitable. You drink nostalgia like a tonic, letting it soothe the bitterness of goodbye. The pain softens, the edges blur. You rewrite the past to make the present bearable. It becomes a ritual. On nights when the world feels empty, you let yourself slip into the glow of memory. The failures are minimized, the betrayals recast as misunderstandings, your own mistakes blurred by the passage of time. You reassure yourself, it was always meant to be this way. You find beauty in the loss, poetry in the heartbreak, order in the chaos. But under the comfort, a subtle numbness creeps in, a poison slowly dulling the truth. You catch yourself idealizing the people you lost. The parent who was never really there, the friend who drifted away, the lover who walked out before you could say what you needed to say. In your mind, they become softer, kinder, more perfect than they ever were. You forgive the unforgivable, excuse the inexcusable. You let yourself believe you were happier, that the cracks only appeared later, that the hurt was worth it for the glow of the good times. But nostalgia is a trickster. It steals your courage by convincing you the best is always behind you. It tells you the endings were justified by the beauty of the beginnings, that your suffering had meaning simply because it led you here. It blinds you to the reality of what was lost, and more dangerously, to the possibility of what could still be found. You start to believe that the only thing left to do is look back, to mourn what was, to wrap yourself in memories like a shield against the emptiness of now. You tell yourself stories about your origins, casting yourself as hero or victim, wise with the benefit of hindsight. You use the sweetness of nostalgia to justify the choices that led you to endings you cannot face. It's easier than honesty, easier than admitting you stayed too long, left too soon, spoke too little, or loved too fiercely. The past becomes a refuge, a place where you are always young, always innocent, always forgiven. You meet others who do the same. You watch as entire lives are built around what was, as if the present is a pale imitation of something that cannot be reclaimed. You join in the rituals, reunions, anniversaries, quiet nights spent reminiscing. Everyone clings to their own version of paradise lost, polishing old joys until they gleam, hiding the cracks that were always there. The world becomes a gallery of what-ifs and might-have-beens, curated by nostalgia's gentle, lying hand. But the price is real. You lose your ability to see the present clearly. You numb yourself to disappointment, to possibility, to the raw pain of endings that could have been different. Nostalgia keeps you safe, but only by keeping you asleep. The more you drink, the more you need, until you are drunk on yesterday and unable to risk tomorrow. One day you wake to find the past does not answer your questions, nor offer you the warmth you seek. The memories, when you look closer, are worn thin by use, their sweetness turned sour by repetition. You realize you have been using nostalgia to avoid the work of living, to explain away regrets, to escape responsibility, to forgive yourself for settling for less than you needed. But even now, you have a choice. You can honor the truth beneath the golden glow. You can see your beginnings for what they were. Beautiful, yes, but also flawed, incomplete, and destined to end. You can let go of the stories that numb you and instead face the ache of honesty. You can mourn what you lost, but you can also let it stay lost, knowing that its beauty lives not in memory, but in the courage it gives you to move forward. Tonight, as nostalgia's sweetness calls you back, pause before you drink. Ask yourself what truth you are hiding, what ending you are trying to justify, what possibility you are afraid to risk. Let yourself feel the ache, the longing, the disappointment that nostalgia tries to cover, and then, gently, return to the present, imperfect, uncertain, but real. The gift of nostalgia is not escape, but understanding. It is the reminder that every beginning contains its ending, and every ending makes space for something new. Let yourself grieve, let yourself remember, but do not let the past become your only home. Drink the memories, but do not let them poison your hope. You are still here. The future is waiting, and there is beauty in what comes next, if only you dare to see it. Heartbeat dependency. There's a strange addiction that nobody warns you about. It doesn't come in a bottle or a pill, and it doesn't look like the stories you've been told. It's not the quiet craving for a substance or the desperate hunger for a fix. It's the relentless need for another person's chaos, the wild, unpredictable storm that only they can conjure. You find yourself living for the next surge, the next sharp gasp, the next moment when your heart pounds so hard you forget the world outside their orbit. This is heartbeat dependency, the state of surrendering your peace, your stability, your quiet happiness, just to feel alive inside someone else's whirlwind. It doesn't start as chaos. In the beginning, it feels electric, magnetic. You meet someone who makes the world more vivid, more dangerous, more thrilling. Every moment with them is charged. Laughter comes louder. Anger burns hotter. Joy is dizzying. Pain is almost beautiful. You start to crave their volatility, their moods, their unpredictability. You call it passion or chemistry or fate, but deep down, something darker is at work. It's not just love, it's a dependency, a rewiring of your nervous system to sync with the rhythm of their storms. Their chaos becomes your music. You memorize the sound of slammed doors, the pulse of arguments, the sweet relief of reconciliation. You become hypersensitive to every shift in their mood, every flicker in their eyes, every word left hanging in the air. Your heart races when they're near, sinks when they're distant, aches when they're gone. You start to wonder if you even exist when they're not around, if your pulse is your own, or just an echo of their unrest. Slowly the cost becomes clear. Your peace, once your greatest treasure, starts to feel like a weakness. Stillness makes you restless. Silence feels like abandonment. You forget how to be calm, how to be alone, how to listen to your own heartbeat without their soundtrack humming in the background. Your nervous system is hijacked. You're always waiting for the next disruption, the next high or low, the next surge of feeling that proves you're still alive. You tell yourself it's romantic. You say love should be intense, that passion should hurt, that only chaos can mean you care enough. But beneath the bravado, you sense the truth. You have given up your stability, your joy, your sense of safety, just to keep the rhythm going. You can't fall asleep without the sound of distant thunder. You can't breathe without the scent of a coming storm. It becomes a cycle. They pull you in, then push you away. You fight, you make up, you break down, you rebuild. Each time you promise yourself you'll leave, but the emptiness afterward is unbearable. Calm feels like suffocation. You scroll through old messages, replay old fights, search for the pulse that proves you're still alive. Their chaos has become your oxygen. Their drama your heartbeat. Their love, if you can even call it that, the only thing that keeps you from fading away. Other people try to warn you. They say you look tired or anxious or lost. They tell you love isn't supposed to feel like drowning, but you shrug them off, convinced that they just don't understand. How could they? When the world outside this bond feels so colorless, so numb, so impossibly quiet. You'd rather bleed in the storm than dry out in the sun. Sometimes, you catch a glimpse of your old self, a moment of peace, a flash of clarity, a memory of what it was like to be calm, grounded, whole. It scares you. It feels alien. You worry that without their chaos, your life will collapse into emptiness. So you run back again and again, craving the noise, the rush, the drama that keeps your heart pounding, even as it wears you down. There's a reason the heart needs rhythm. Too much chaos, and it races, then falters, then fails. Too much calm, and it withers. But the healthiest rhythm isn't borrowed from someone else's storm. It comes from within. From learning to hold your own pulse, to build your own peace, to find aliveness in something gentler, deeper, more enduring than chaos. Breaking heartbeat dependency is hard. It means sitting with discomfort, letting the storm pass, listening to the silence until it begins to sound like music again. It means reclaiming your nervous system, your joy, your ability to breathe without needing someone else's turbulence to make you feel real. It means remembering who you were before the chaos and daring to become that person again. The world is full of people addicted to chaos, people who have mistaken drama for intimacy, conflict for passion, wounds for proof of love. But you don't have to live at the mercy of another person's storm. You don't have to surrender your peace just to keep the rhythm alive. Your heart is your own. Your life is your own. And you are allowed to feel alive without burning yourself out just to keep someone else's music playing. So if you find yourself craving the chaos, aching for the rush, longing for the next explosion, pause. Listen to your own heartbeat. Let it be slow. Let it be quiet. Let it be yours. There is a peace beyond the storm, a calm that isn't empty, a love that doesn't require you to bleed for every pulse. You are not defined by their chaos. You are not kept alive by their turbulence. You can choose a different rhythm. You can choose yourself. Floating on apologies. You know the script by heart now. The slow unraveling of promises, the storm of disappointment, and then the desperate, soothing apology. It happens again and again, so often you can predict the words before they're spoken. They're sorry. They really are. Their eyes shimmer with regret. Their voice cracks with sincerity. You want so badly to believe them that you let the apology wash over you, soaking into your tired heart, buoying you just long enough to believe. This time, things will change. This is the gravity of floating on apologies, where you survive on the breathless hope carried by their remorse, accepting temporary regret as proof of future redemption, even as the same cycle begins again. It's a story older than language. In the ancient dance of connection and disappointment, apologies become lifelines. Maybe you remember the first one, a parent who raised their voice, a friend who betrayed your trust, a lover who promised you were everything. When they apologized, it felt holy. Their regret became a lifeboat, a promise that pain was not for nothing, that hurt would give way to healing. It was easier to forgive, easier to believe, than to face the cold fact that things might never truly be different. But over time, apologies grow thin. The words, once heavy with meaning, become lighter, repeated too often, spoken too quickly, received with a practiced smile. You try to track which apologies led to real change, and which merely hit the reset button, clearing the slate for the next round. Sometimes you can't tell the difference. The line blurs between repentance and routine, between remorse and habit. Yet, you keep floating, caught in the gentle current of their regret, afraid to look below the surface, for fear of finding only emptiness. Maybe it's a relationship that never heals. Endless arguments, broken boundaries, late-night promises whispered into the dark. Each time, you threaten to walk away. Each time, they beg you to stay. Their apologies drip with all the right words. I was wrong. I'll do better. I don't want to lose you. You want to believe that love can win, that people can change, that pain can teach. And sometimes, for a moment, things do get better. For a day or a week or even a month, the air is clearer, the smiles are genuine, the weight is lighter. But the cycle is patient. Old habits creep back in. Tensions rise. The apology hovers in the background, already waiting its turn. Other times, it's family. You're asked to forgive for the sake of peace, to move on, to forget old wounds because they said they were sorry. The apology becomes a ritual, an eraser for stories too painful to hold in the light. You learn to accept less, to expect less, to make yourself small enough to fit inside the space between hurt and healing. It's easier to float than to risk drowning in confrontation, easier to accept remorse than to demand transformation. And sometimes, you're the one giving the apologies, desperate to be forgiven for falling short, promising yourself and others that next time will be different. You know, deep down, how hard it is to change, how easy it is to slide back into comfort, to repeat what's familiar, even when it hurts. You hope your regret is enough, that your sincerity is proof of your intent. You hope that forgiveness can keep the world from falling apart. There is comfort in the cycle. Apologies are soft. They offer relief, the illusion of a reset, the temporary balm that keeps the relationship from shattering. They allow you to believe that this time is not like the last, that this pain is not the final word. Floating on apologies, you drift between disappointment and hope, your heart learning to ride the waves of remorse rather than risk the storm of final endings. But there is a cost to endless forgiveness. Each time you accept an apology with no change behind it, you give up a piece of yourself. Your boundaries blur, your standards bend, your voice grows quieter. You begin to believe that hurt is a necessary prelude to healing, that love must always be paid for with pain. The apologies pile up like driftwood, temporary, fragile, easily swept away by the next wave. You become skilled at surviving in shallow water, always floating, never standing firm. Eventually, you may start to wonder, what would happen if you stopped floating? If you demanded action, not words, real transformation, not temporary regret? Would the relationship survive? Or would the apology finally sink under its own weight? Would you be left alone? Or would you finally learn to swim on your own, untethered from the cycle? It's terrifying to find out. The familiar comfort of apologies is hard to let go. It feels safer to stay, to hope, to forgive, than to risk emptiness, anger, or loss. But deep down, an apology, no matter how sincere, is not a promise. It is only a possibility. Real change is measured not by regret, but by the hard work of becoming someone new. So, next time you feel yourself floating on apologies, pause. Ask yourself if you're being kept afloat, or if you're slowly drifting out to sea, away from your own power and self-respect. Notice how the cycle makes you feel. Hopeful, yes, but also exhausted, uncertain, afraid to ask for more. Remember that you are worthy of more than words, worthy of change, worthy of a love that does not rely on pain to feel real. You don't have to drown in regret. yours or theirs. You don't have to make a home on the surface of apologies. When you choose to stand, to ask for more, to trust your own worth, you might discover that you can swim, that the shore was never as far as you feared. The cycle can end. The water can still. You can let go, and finally, begin again. Prison of potential. You replay the moments again and again, the spark in their eyes, the promise in their words, the rare times they let you see beneath the armor. You remember the hope you felt at the beginning, the dreams you shared, the secret conviction that you'd finally found someone who could grow with you, heal with you, become extraordinary with you. It's those flashes of brilliance that keep you here, even when the days turn gray and the distance between you widens. You tell yourself they just need time. They're wounded, they're learning, they're almost there. You hang on to glimpses, their gentle apology after a fight, the plans they make for someday, the softness in their voice when they imagine a different life. You forgive their absence, their distractions, the endless delays and second chances, because you've fallen in love not just with the person they are, but with the person they could be. The version you see when you close your eyes. The one that makes you feel hope isn't wasted. But as the weeks slide by, something quieter settles in. A kind of loneliness you can't quite name. You keep waiting for the breakthrough, the change, the day they finally choose the future you both imagined. You believe every promise, accept every apology, make excuses for every disappointment. You pour your energy into fixing, nurturing, holding space. You convince yourself that love is patience, that your endurance is proof of devotion. But the truth is, you're sacrificing your present for a future that always seems just out of reach. It's a strange kind of prison, one without bars, built from hope and what-ifs. You stay because you're loyal to their potential, because you want to believe the best about them. You replay their highs, their moments of honesty, the rare nights when it feels like you're both on the same page. But the gaps grow longer, the distance widens, and you begin to realize you're holding your breath, waiting for a reality that never quite arrives. You notice how much you've given up. Friends who wonder where you've gone, hobbies left behind, plans canceled, boundaries erased. You tell yourself it's just for now, just until they find their footing. You trade your present happiness for the hope of a better tomorrow, but tomorrow keeps moving, always one step ahead, always out of reach. Sometimes, you see them for who they really are, flawed, scared, stuck. You see the patterns repeating, the promises fading, the changes never coming. For a moment, anger flares and you want to walk away. But then you remember the first time they opened up, the story that broke your heart, the way they looked at you when you believed in them. So you stay, you wait. You tell yourself they're worth it, that you'll both be rewarded for holding on. You start to feel the weight of your own hope. It becomes a burden, one you carry alone, while they stumble through the same routines. You try to inspire them, encourage them, challenge them to grow. Sometimes they respond, make a grand gesture, promise to do better, swear that things will change. But the cycle repeats. The breakthrough never lasts. The reality is always eclipsed by the idea of what could be. It's hard to admit what's really happening. You're sacrificing your own life for a dream. You're missing out on real joy, real connection, real time that you can never reclaim. You become a caretaker for their future, ignoring your own needs, telling yourself that love means waiting, believing, never giving up. But deep down, a quieter truth stirs. You're afraid to let go of the fantasy, because if you do, you'll have to face what's left, the real person, with all their limits and fears and unfinished growth. There are moments of clarity, when you realize you're more invested in their potential than they are, that you can't do the work for them, that your love can't substitute for their own willingness to change. You see that every day you wait, you're living less fully, shrinking yourself to fit inside their unfinished story. But the hope is powerful. The dream is hard to abandon. You stay, even as the days slip by, because you believe in what could be, and that belief feels like purpose, like love, like destiny. Yet, with every season that passes, the cost grows. You feel yourself drifting, less happy, less vibrant, less yourself. You wonder what would happen if you let go, if you demanded more, if you chose your own present instead of their possible future. But that means facing loss, uncertainty, the void left when hope no longer fills the silence. So you stay, bound by the golden handcuffs of potential, caught in a prison with no locks except your own dreams. You watch yourself fade as you wait for the miracle, the transformation, the day your sacrifices finally make sense. But the miracle doesn't come. The days keep passing, and you begin to understand, loving someone's potential is not the same as being loved in return. Waiting for the future can cost you everything you have in the present. In the end, the choice is yours. Stay for what could be, or walk away for what is. Freedom is waiting on the other side of the fantasy, but you have to risk the ache of letting go. Only then can you step into a future that belongs to you, no longer a prisoner of someone else's potential. Sparks of destruction. There's a kind of fire that feels like love, a spark, a surge, the electric pulse of an argument that leaves you breathless, heart pounding, words still echoing in the space between you. It feels alive, dangerous, intoxicating. You tell yourself that the heat means something real is burning between you, that every slammed door, every shouted word, every stormy reconciliation is proof that you still matter to each other. You've learned to crave the drama, to interpret the chaos as evidence of connection. When things are quiet, you worry that love has faded, or worse, that it was never real to begin with. This is the paradox of sparks of destruction. You mistake conflict for passion, convinced that any love without friction must be counterfeit, hollow, a lie waiting to be exposed. You might find yourself poking at old wounds, pressing on bruises just to feel the sting. You might pick a fight over nothing, escalate the smallest slight into a full-scale argument, simply to spark the fire again. When things are calm, you feel restless, uneasy, as if silence itself is an accusation. The peace feels unnatural, sterile, almost frightening. So you goad, you challenge, you test boundaries, not because you want to destroy, but because you're terrified of emptiness. You've grown up on stories where love is a battlefield, where passion is measured in wounds and tears and wild declarations hurled in the heat of the moment. You can't help but believe that anything less is just pretending. This pattern isn't just yours. It lives in families, in friendships, in entire cultures that worship the idea that struggle is the proof of depth. You might remember the thrill of childhood fights, the rush of adrenaline after slamming a door, the dizzying makeup that follows a meltdown. That pattern carves itself into your bones. Later, in love, you find yourself repeating it, subconsciously drawn to relationships where the highs and lows are as sharp as broken glass, where every touch has an edge and every word can draw blood. But beneath the fire, something else is happening. You start to lose sight of what love feels like without the friction. You confuse safety with boredom, kindness with apathy, mutual respect with emotional distance. When someone offers you gentleness, you recoil, suspecting they must not really care. If they did, wouldn't they fight harder, shout louder, bleed for you? If you aren't fighting, how can you know you're still alive? And so, you keep circling the same flames, burning, rebuilding, burning again. The cycle becomes addictive. The spark is a fix, the aftermath a rush of relief. But the destruction accumulates. Arguments leave scars. Words said in anger stain the walls of your memory. The trust wears thin. Eventually, the passion you thought you were chasing becomes the very thing that drives you apart. You want love to be a storm, but storms tear things down. Somewhere inside, a quieter voice calls for something else. A peace so deep it feels foreign, a steadiness so gentle it scares you. You want to believe it's possible, but the old wiring tugs at you. You've been taught that only the most turbulent waters are real, that stillness must mean something's missing. But that isn't true. The real test of love isn't how loud you can scream or how many times you can break and come back together. It's what happens when things are quiet, when the storm passes, when you're left with nothing but each other and the ordinary days. Love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Passion doesn't require pain to be deep. The most powerful connections are often forged in the silence between battles, in the gentle moments when you choose each other, not because you have to fight, but because you want to stay. If you keep seeking sparks of destruction, eventually there will be nothing left to burn. What remains then? Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to let the fire die, to sit in the quiet, to see what grows in the ashes, to trust that love can thrive in calm, in kindness, in respect that isn't built on conflict. So, next time you feel the urge to ignite the argument, ask yourself, is this really passion or just fear of emptiness? Are you sparking the fire because you want to feel alive, or because you're afraid of what you'll find if the flames go out? Maybe real love isn't in the heat of the fight, but in the quiet that follows, the place where you finally let yourself rest, unburned, together, whole. Void you decorate. You wake up to the quiet, the kind of silence that settles not just in the room, but in your bones. The space around you is familiar, every corner arranged, every surface curated. On the shelf are souvenirs from trips you barely remember. On the walls hang photographs from parties where you smiled for the camera and felt nothing inside. There's a plant by the window, carefully watered but never quite thriving, and a scented candle that's meant to bring comfort. Even though you can't remember the last time its smell actually meant anything. Everything is in its place, perfectly arranged, perfectly still. But beneath the order, beneath the surface, is a vast and pulsing emptiness, a void you decorate, so it looks like a place you want to stay. You weren't always like this. There was a time when you filled spaces with laughter, with friends, with the hope that something real might take root. But as the years passed, as disappointments accumulated and doors quietly closed, the emptiness began to grow. At first, you tried to fill it. You bought things, clothes, books, new furniture. You invited people over, hosted dinners, told yourself that noise was the same as connection. You painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, kept busy. But no matter how much you moved or changed or consumed, the feeling lingered. The sense that, beneath it all, nothing was really different. So, you adapted. You learned how to make the void livable. You hung curtains over the blank windows, strung up fairy lights to disguise the darkness. You filled the silence with playlists and podcasts, letting the voices of strangers distract you from the ache of your own thoughts. You told yourself the routine was comforting, the morning coffee in the same mug, the evening shows that faded into sleep. Rituals became anchors, habits became walls, and you decorated them all, layering meaning onto surfaces that never quite absorbed it. You became skilled at inventing reasons for the emptiness. I'm just busy, you tell yourself. I like my own company. I'm working on myself. Each excuse is a throw pillow on the couch, a new print on the wall, a clever arrangement of words to cover what's missing. You learn to answer questions about your life with a practiced smile. Things are good, you say, just keeping it simple. You decorate the void with stories that sound enough like the truth that even you start to believe them. But in the quiet moments, when the noise fades and the distractions fall away, the void reasserts itself. It presses against your skin, insistent, reminding you of everything that's been lost or never arrived. It's in the unfinished conversations, the friendships that dwindled to nothing, the calls you don't return, and the messages you never send. It's in the promises you made to yourself, long ago, about how things would be different by now. You tell yourself you're content, but there is always a flicker of doubt, a shadow that slips through the cracks, reminding you of what isn't there. Sometimes, you let yourself dream of leaving the void behind, of tearing down the careful decorations, letting the emptiness show, daring to hope for something more. But the prospect is terrifying. The void, for all its loneliness, is safe. It asks nothing of you but endurance. It requires no risk, no vulnerability, no chance of being hurt again. The decorations become armor, a way to survive, to avoid the pain of admitting how much you long for more. You watch others step out into the unknown, risking rejection for the hope of real connection. You envy their courage, but you stay where you are, rearranging the same old pieces, dusting the same old shelves. You tell yourself you are building a sanctuary, but sometimes it feels more like a mausoleum, a shrine to a life that never quite began. There are moments, rare and startling, when the void cracks open. Someone breaks through, an unexpected kindness, a sudden burst of laughter, a conversation that goes deeper than you meant it to. For a heartbeat, the emptiness recedes, and you remember what it's like to feel alive. But the moment passes. The void is patient. It waits for you to return, and you do, because it's easier than admitting what you truly need. You fill the emptiness with new projects, new distractions. You chase goals that lose their meaning as soon as you reach them. You tell yourself this is growth, that you're making progress, but the emptiness is always one step ahead, waiting for you at the finish line. You decorate the void with ambition, with achievement, with the appearance of having it all together. But when the applause fades, when the lights go out, the silence returns. Deeper now, more familiar. You wonder what it would feel like to strip away the decorations, to sit with the emptiness, to listen to what it's trying to tell you, to admit that you want more, not things, not approval, not even comfort, but connection, risk, meaning. You wonder if the void is really your enemy, or if it's just the part of you that refuses to be satisfied with less than what you truly need. Tonight, as you look around your carefully curated life, let yourself see the void you've worked so hard to disguise. See the beauty in your effort, the courage it takes to keep going, the creativity in making emptiness bearable, but also see the possibility that waits beyond the walls you've built, the life that could begin if you dared to let go of the safety of the void and stepped out, unadorned, into the light. The void is not your home. It is a waiting room, a space between what was and what could be. You can decorate it for as long as you need, but someday when you are ready, you can leave. And when you do, you may find that the world outside is not as empty as you feared, and that what you've been longing for has been waiting, patient and unadorned, for you to come home to yourself. Closeness without clarity. There's a kind of closeness that feels intoxicating at first, a breathless rush, the sense of finally being seen, finally being chosen, finally allowed to dissolve the lonely edges of your own life into someone else's. You lean in, eager to merge, to share, to become inseparable. You tell yourself that this is what love looks like. Two people blending into a single story, a single home, a single shape. You start to blur the lines, eager for intimacy, mistaking the erasure of boundaries for the ultimate proof that you belong. It starts innocently enough. You spend every spare moment together, finishing each other's sentences, learning every quirk and preference, giving up old routines to fit seamlessly into theirs. Your friends become their friends. Their family becomes yours. Their dreams creep into your language, their fears into your heartbeat. You start to measure yourself by their moods. If they're happy, you're happy. If they're lost, you're desperate to find them, even if it means losing your own way. The edges that used to define you begin to blur, smudged and softened, until you're no longer sure where you end and they begin. You let little things slide. Maybe you ignore your favorite music because they don't like it. Or you drop your hobbies because they'd rather spend the evening together. Your opinions bend toward theirs. Your priorities shift, almost imperceptibly, until the person in the mirror feels like a supporting character in someone else's story. You call it compromise, but deep down, it's surrender. A quiet fading of your own colors in favor of theirs. You believe that intimacy means dissolving your identity, that love demands this level of sacrifice. But there is a danger in closeness without clarity, in intimacy that erases the lines between you. You begin to mistake comfort for connection, familiarity for belonging. The more you give up, the more desperate you become to be needed, to be chosen, to stay essential in their world, even if it means becoming invisible in your own. Sometimes you sense the loss before you can name it. There's a hollow feeling when you try to make a decision on your own and realize you don't know what you want anymore. There's an ache when you reach for an old joy and find it gone, replaced by someone else's preferences. You try to speak your mind, but the words feel foreign, fragile, easily dismissed. You shrink your needs, your desires, your voice, afraid that standing apart will break the fragile bond you've worked so hard to build. In the beginning, you thought this was love, the willingness to blur every boundary, to let yourself be swept away. But true closeness doesn't demand self-erasure. Real intimacy is built not in the shadow, but in the light, when two whole distinct people choose to stand beside each other, not inside each other's silhouettes. Love thrives in the space between, in the respect for difference, in the courage to be fully yourself, even as you draw near. But without clarity, you drift. You wake up one day and realize you've forgotten what your own laughter sounds like, what dreams you once held, what passions once set you alight. You feel a creeping emptiness, an unnameable sadness, the slow extinguishing of your own light. You are present in their world, but absent from your own. You live in their shadow, but the sun no longer warms you. You might try to justify the loss. You tell yourself it's a phase, that things will balance out, that your needs aren't as important. But the ache only grows. You resent the person you once adored, blaming them for a theft they never intended to commit. You long for solitude, for space, for the chance to breathe your own air, but guilt holds you in place. You fear that reclaiming your boundaries will mean losing the closeness you crave. So you stay, you fade, you pretend. But every act of self-erasure is a silent betrayal, not just of yourself, but of the relationship you hoped to build. Love that demands you vanish is not love. It is need, it is fear. It is loneliness dressed in intimacy's clothes. You deserve more than to be an outline in someone else's life. You deserve the fullness of your own presence, the right to your own voice, your own dreams, your own radiant light. The way back is slow, but possible. It starts with the smallest acts of reclamation, listening to the music you love, calling an old friend, saying no without apology, making a choice that is yours alone. It means sitting with discomfort, with the fear that boundaries will drive you apart, and learning instead that healthy distance is the birthplace of desire, of curiosity, of true closeness. It means letting your edges be sharp, letting your colors be bold, letting your life be your own, even as you share it. You can be close without being lost. You can love without dissolving. You can hold hands with someone else and still keep the compass of your own soul. Your light does not dim theirs. It only makes the world brighter. True intimacy is not about living in someone's shadow, but about standing side by side, each of you whole, each of you seen, each of you illuminated by the fire that burns within. So, step out from the blur. Draw the lines, not to divide, but to define. Return to yourself, and let your presence be the gift you bring. In the clarity of your own light, you'll find the kind of closeness that doesn't cost you your soul, a love where two flames burn brighter together, never asking either to go out. Gambling with loneliness. There's a secret pact you make in the quiet moments of longing, a deal struck in the shadows of your own heart. You'll risk everything for one more chance at connection. You'll put your happiness on the line, again and again, not because the odds are good, but because the alternative, solitude, terrifies you more than heartbreak ever could. This is gambling with loneliness, the art of placing blind bets on love, friendship, even fleeting attention, just to avoid the cold certainty of being alone. It's easy to hide this urge beneath hope. You tell yourself it's optimism, that maybe this time things will be different. Maybe this time the person who hurt you will come back changed. Maybe this new face will finally see you, understand you, want you. You convince yourself that the risk is reasonable, that all it takes is a little more patience, a little more sacrifice, a little more of yourself put on the table. But deep down, you know the truth. Every time you gamble with loneliness, the stakes are higher, the losses cut deeper, and the prize slips further away. Think about the messages you send at midnight, the half-hearted apologies, the desperate confessions, the silent scroll through old conversations. You replay memories, both sweet and bitter, looking for evidence that someone, anyone, is reaching back through the dark. Sometimes they do, and for a brief moment, you feel the rush, the thrill of not being alone, the warmth of another's presence, the intoxicating hope that maybe, this time, it's real. But just as quickly, the silence returns. The line goes dead. You're left holding your breath, waiting for the next signal, ready to wager your happiness all over again. The world is full of stories built on this gamble. There's the friend who forgives one more lie, the lover who returns to a relationship that's mostly memories and maybes, the child who keeps calling a parent who never answers. Each one rolls the dice, hoping that loneliness can be outplayed, that heartbreak can be outlasted, that love, any love, is better than the cold ache of solitude. But loneliness is a clever dealer. It knows how to play your fears, how to keep you in the game even when you should have walked away. It whispers that solitude is failure, that your worth depends on being chosen, seen, wanted. It offers you consolation prizes, fleeting connections, shallow conversations, the sweet poison of nostalgia. And each time you take the bait, each time you bet your piece for one more spin, loneliness tightens its grip. It doesn't care if you win or lose. It only cares that you keep playing. There are days when the risk feels justified. You see couples laughing on park benches, friends trading secrets over coffee, families gathering around crowded tables. The sight of togetherness stings. You feel exposed, raw, as if everyone else has cracked to the code and you're the only one left with empty hands. So you reach out, again and again, just to remind yourself that you exist in someone's orbit, even if only for a moment. You trade pieces of yourself for company. You downplay your needs, hide your wounds, accept less than you deserve. You compromise, you forgive, you overlook the signs because loneliness has convinced you that almost anything is better than nothing. You make promises you can't keep just to avoid the mirror's accusation that you are, after all, alone. But the more you gamble, the more you lose. Your happiness becomes collateral damage. The comfort of company is always fleeting, always conditional. You wake up next to someone and still feel cold. You laugh with friends, but feel the hollow space where your real self should be. You pour yourself into others and wonder why there's nothing left for you. And yet, the game continues. Even when the losses pile up, you keep betting. On new faces, old memories, empty promises, distant hopes. Because the pain of heartbreak, as sharp as it is, feels survivable. The pain of loneliness feels endless, like falling through empty space with no one to catch you. You'd rather risk everything, again and again, than face the silence of being alone with yourself. But what if the real trick isn't to keep gambling, but to learn to sit with the silence? What if loneliness, as brutal as it seems, isn't the enemy you imagine? What if, in the quiet, you could finally hear your own voice, raw, honest, unfiltered by the need to perform for someone else? Maybe the greatest risk is not betting on another chance, but betting on yourself, daring to believe that your worth is not measured by the warmth of another body or the echo of someone else's words. It's a hard lesson to learn, and no one teaches it willingly. The world rewards connection, celebrates romance, makes solitude look like a failure. But there's a quiet power in learning to stand alone, in letting go of the games, the endless wagers, the false hopes. In the beginning, the silence is deafening. You may feel exposed, abandoned, stripped bare, but slowly you begin to notice what remains. Your own breath, your own thoughts, your own capacity for peace. You find that solitude is not emptiness, but space. Space to heal, to grow, to know yourself without the distortion of needing someone else to reflect you back. Maybe, in the end, happiness is not something you win by risking everything on others, but something you build in the slow, patient work of being at home in your own company. Maybe the only real victory in the game of loneliness is to stop playing, just for a while, and see who you are when the bets are off and the world is finally quiet. So tonight, if you find yourself reaching for your phone, ready to gamble your happiness for one more moment of company, pause. Ask yourself what you're risking and what you're hoping to win. Notice the urge to escape the silence and let it pass. Give yourself the chance to sit with your loneliness, not as punishment, but as a doorway to something deeper. Because in the end, you are the only constant in your story, and learning to love that fact is the one bet worth making. Ruin as ritual. You know the pattern by heart now. It begins quietly, sometimes with a tiny disappointment, a missed connection, an unease that lingers at the edges of your day. You brush it off, tell yourself you're imagining things, but somewhere deep inside, you already know what's coming. You can feel the script gathering itself, the slow tightening, the chill in the air before the storm. You could change course, you could reach for hope, but you don't. Because hope by now feels like a lie you told yourself too many times and grew tired of believing. So you let it happen. You let yourself slide down the slope you've carved so many times before. You start the rituals, the withdrawal, the cutting words, the small intentional sabotages. You know which buttons to push, which stories to replay, which old scars to scratch until they bleed. Maybe you lash out. Maybe you go silent. Maybe you disappear for days, letting everyone know, without ever saying a word, that you're preparing for another collapse. There's a comfort in it, strange as it seems. Ruin has become a ritual, a ceremony of destruction you perform almost without thinking. You dismantle the fragile hope you've built, brick by brick, returning to the wreckage because it feels familiar, because it feels real. You convince yourself that falling apart is more honest than pretending to hold it together. You know exactly how the collapse will play out, who will leave, who will blame, how you will punish yourself in the aftermath. The pain is reliable, the chaos is predictable. In a world where everything else slips through your fingers, at least you can count on ruin. You tell yourself you're just being honest, refusing the easy comfort of false hope, refusing to dress up wounds that never really healed. When you break things, at least you're in control. When you destroy what matters, at least you don't have to fear losing it to someone else. So, you reenact the devastation again and again until you know every line by heart. You let things fall, you let yourself fall, and there's relief in the landing, in the finality, in the echoing silence that follows. Friends and lovers try to pull you back, offer you their hope, their belief in better days. But it never lasts. Their optimism feels naive, even insulting. You want to believe them, but you know how this story ends. You've seen it too many times. You go through the motions, apologies, promises, maybe even a brief attempt at repair. But underneath, you're already counting down to the next unraveling. You've made ruin your ritual, and it's hard to imagine another way to live. You watch others build, rebuild, try again. You see them strive for meaning, reach for happiness, cling to hope with knuckles white. You envy their energy, their faith, their foolishness. You remember when you were like that, when the future was a story you still wanted to tell. But hope failed you, or maybe you failed hope. Now, collapse feels truer. Sadness is honest. Despair feels like proof you've seen the world for what it is, and survived the reckoning. Sometimes, in the quiet aftermath, you wonder if you could break the pattern. If you could choose differently, step off the well-worn path, reach for something softer. But the ritual is strong. The gravity of ruin pulls you back, again and again, until collapse is the only ending you trust. You watch yourself sabotage good things, push away people who care, destroy comfort before it has a chance to take root. You tell yourself it's protection, better to shatter it yourself than to let the world do it for you. But every ritual has a price. Over time, the ruins pile up. Failed relationships, abandoned dreams, friendships that went silent, chances never taken. You move through the wreckage, numb and unsurprised. You stop expecting anything different. You learn to love the emptiness, the clean ache of aftermath. You wrap yourself in loneliness because it feels safer than hope, more honest than disappointment. Yet, late at night, a question claws at you. What if collapse isn't honesty, but habit? What if ruin is a comfort you cling to, not because it's real, but because it's familiar? You remember moments, small, bright, almost forgotten, when you let hope in and the world didn't end. But hope is exhausting. Hope demands risk, demands trust, demands the courage to try again. Ruin asks nothing from you, only that you repeat the ritual, that you remember the lines, that you accept the pain as proof you are still here. And so, you return to it again and again. You become an expert at falling apart, a master of endings, a connoisseur of collapse. You convince yourself that nothing else is possible, that the script can't be rewritten. You say you are honest, but honesty has become a shield, a way to keep the world out, a way to avoid the terror of hope. It's easier to expect devastation, to trust in ruin, to make it your ritual, your rhythm, your truth. In the end, you find a kind of peace in the wreckage. You know who you are here. You know the rules. The world outside may change, but ruin will always welcome you home. You tell yourself collapse is the most honest thing you can do, because hope is for those who haven't yet been broken. And if anyone asks why you keep returning to devastation, you simply say, at least here, in the ruins, I know how to survive. Devotion without discernment. ChatGPT said, there's a dangerous tenderness in loving someone so fully that you stop questioning, where devotion blurs into surrender and compassion quietly becomes a slow unraveling of yourself. You tell yourself it's noble, maybe even holy, to give everything, to accept every flaw and forgive every wound. You let their needs eclipse your own. Your boundaries dissolve like salt in water, until you're no longer sure where they end and you begin. This is devotion without discernment, the point where loyalty is no longer a gift but a surrender, where loving without judgment quietly becomes self-erasure. It often begins as something beautiful. You want to see the best in them. You remember every gentle moment, every spark of their potential, every private pain they let you glimpse. You overlook their sharp words, their absences, their small betrayals, convinced that your love can heal or change what life has broken. And maybe, for a time, it feels like it works. The world says love is patient, love is kind, love endures. You tell yourself this is what it means to truly care, to give without taking, to forgive without pause, to love without ever measuring the cost. But over time, your compassion becomes a kind of blindness. The red flags become white flags, signs not of danger, but of surrender. You explain away the patterns. They're just stressed, just tired, just misunderstood. You excuse what hurts you, bury your needs, let your boundaries erode. You pride yourself on being the bigger person, the one who never gives up, the one whose love is unconditional. The suffering becomes a strange badge of honor, a proof of how deeply you feel, how much you're willing to bear. And yet, somewhere inside, you start to shrink. The world narrows to their needs, their moods, their happiness. You lose your voice, stop asking for what you want. You flinch from confrontation. Swallow your anger. Let resentment simmer in the darkness. The devotion that once felt like strength now feels like weakness, an inability to say enough, to choose yourself, to refuse what hurts you. Your compassion, unchecked, becomes self-erosion, a gentle wearing away of your own worth. Maybe you learned this early. Maybe you were taught that loving means sacrificing, that goodness means turning the other cheek. Maybe you were praised for being easygoing, for forgiving, for never making trouble. Or maybe someone convinced you, slowly, that your needs don't matter, that to love is to give until you're empty, and only then are you worthy of being kept. So you pour yourself out, hoping one day they'll notice, or change, or love you back the way you love them. You hope, and you stay, even as you fade. But love without discernment is not love. It's abandonment of self. True compassion does not ask you to set yourself on fire, to keep someone else warm. It does not demand that you disappear so another can thrive. Healthy love, love that endures, that heals, requires boundaries, honesty, the willingness to say no when something isn't right. It means being brave enough to judge what's good for you, to protect your own heart, to demand respect even from those you adore. It takes courage to admit when your devotion is costing you too much, to recognize that compassion without discernment is not virtue, but self-destruction, to learn that it's possible to love someone deeply and still walk away when loving them means betraying yourself. The hardest truth is that your worth is not measured by how much you can endure, but by how much you're willing to protect yourself, by how bravely you can love yourself as fiercely as you love others. So if you find yourself fading, shrinking, giving everything and receiving only emptiness in return, pause. Remember that discernment is not cruelty and boundaries are not selfish. Compassion should build you up, not tear you down. Devotion, without self-respect, is just another way of vanishing. You are not here to disappear for someone else. You are here to love, yes, but also to be loved and to remain whole. Let your compassion include yourself. Let your devotion be a light, not a fire that consumes you. And if you must choose, remember, the most enduring love is the one that lets you remain yourself, unbroken, unapologetically alive. Debt of affection. You count them up, one by one. The nights you stayed up waiting, the apologies you made when it wasn't your fault, the secrets you kept to shield someone else's heart. You remember every birthday remembered, every message sent first, every moment you put their needs before your own. You stack them in your mind like coins in a hidden jar. Each sacrifice, each kindness, each moment you swallowed your pride or pain, quietly filed away as proof. You build your case in silence. I did this for you, so you should love me back. It feels fair at first. The world runs on give and take, you tell yourself. Every relationship is a negotiation, an unspoken ledger where affection is balanced against effort. You give and give, not because you don't want to, but because you hope, maybe even expect, that each act earns you another inch of closeness, another day of warmth, another affirmation that you matter. You watch for signs that the debt is being repaid. A word of praise, a returned gesture, a rare moment when you are the one being chosen. And when it doesn't come, when the scales remain lopsided, you feel it as a wound, raw and unspoken. You begin to tally the slights too, the times your efforts were ignored, the times your presence was taken for granted, the days you felt invisible. The ledger grows not just with gifts given, but with injuries endured. You keep score, even when you wish you didn't, because the only thing worse than not being loved is feeling that you've earned it and been denied. The debt grows heavier with every unmet need, every unreciprocated gesture, every quiet hope that falls flat. You convince yourself that if you just give a little more, sacrifice a little more, the equation will finally balance. You cook their favorite meal when you're tired. You forgive without apology. You make space for their storms while keeping your own quiet. Each time you choose them over yourself, you add another tally mark. The jar fills, and you wait for it to be noticed, for it to matter, for the math to add up to love. But the math never quite works. Affection, you find, is not a currency that can be exchanged on demand. No matter how many sacrifices you make, no matter how carefully you keep score, love does not arrive as a reward. The ledger you keep is yours alone. The other person lives by a different calculus, one you can't see, one that doesn't always value what you give or measure what you give up. You start to wonder if the sacrifices themselves are invisible, or if perhaps they have become expected, part of the background noise of your devotion. You look back and realize how much you've lost in the pursuit of balance, the parts of yourself you set aside, the needs you dismissed, the quiet voice inside that wanted to be chosen simply for being you, not for the tally of what you've done. You find yourself resentful, brittle, waiting for gratitude that never arrives. The weight of unacknowledged giving bends your heart into strange shapes, longing, anger, quiet despair. You wonder when love became a transaction, and if it was always that way. There are moments when you try to stop keeping score. You tell yourself to give freely, to love without expectation, to let the ledger go. But the habit is hard to break. You were taught, by family, by society, by stories whispered through generations, that love must be earned, that worthiness is measured by what you are willing to endure. You watch the world praise sacrifice, celebrate selflessness, elevate the martyr who gives everything and asks nothing. But in private, you know the emptiness of love that must always be proved. One day you meet someone who loves differently, someone who offers kindness without calculation, whose affection arrives without strings or debt. At first, it unsettles you. You reach for your ledger, unsure how to proceed when there is nothing to earn, nothing to prove. But slowly you begin to understand. Real love is not a balance sheet, not a debt to be paid or collected. It is presence, attention, the meeting of two lives in their wholeness, without bargains, without the grinding hunger for reciprocation. You learn awkwardly to give not as a bid for affection, but as an expression of it. You allow yourself to receive love without suspicion, without fear that you will someday be handed a bill. You discover that love, when it is real, is its own justification, that the most profound gifts are those given freely, not to earn a place, but to celebrate connection, that you are worthy, not for your sacrifices, but for your existence, your being, your simple, irreplaceable self. And slowly you set down the ledger. You stop counting. You forgive the old wounds, let go of the silent debts. You realize that every act of love is a choice, not a contract, and that the only love worth having is the kind that expects nothing in return. You begin to trust that you can be cherished just as you are, that affection can flow without calculation, that the heart keeps its own unwritten balance. Tonight, as you reflect on all you've given and all you've received, let yourself rest. You have nothing to prove, no debt to collect, no worth to measure in sacrifice. Love does not keep score. It simply is. Unexpected, abundant, free. And so are you, if you let yourself believe it. Reflection of regret. Sometimes, it's easier to blame someone else for the hollow ache inside you. It's simpler to look at their distance, their silence, their indifference, and convince yourself that if only they were warmer, kinder, more attentive, you'd finally feel whole. You scan their every gesture, searching for the spark you're missing. You replay conversations, looking for proof that they used to care more, that something's changed. that they're the reason you feel so alone. But the truth is deeper and much harder to accept. The emptiness you feel didn't start with them, and it won't end with them either. What you see in their coldness is really the reflection of your own regret, projected like a film onto the blank screen of their presence. We all want someone to save us from ourselves. We want to believe that the right person, the right relationship, the right word will fill the spaces we keep hidden, will heal the wounds we carry like secrets. And so, when we fall in love, or even just let someone close, we hand them the script to our happiness. We wait for their warmth, their attention, their affection to rescue us from loneliness. Every disappointment, every missed connection, every moment they don't give us exactly what we crave becomes evidence, proof that they're the problem, that their coldness is the source of our pain. You convince yourself that if only they would change, you'd feel better. If only they would reach for you, call first, ask the right questions, everything would be easier. But beneath that longing, there is an old ache, a regret you haven't faced, a truth you're not ready to hold. Maybe it's the way you abandon your own dreams to fit someone else's world. Maybe it's the opportunities you let pass by, the apologies you never made, the words you swallowed to keep the peace. Maybe it's the years spent waiting for permission to live, to want, to ask for more. When you refuse to confront your own emptiness, it grows. It echoes through every silence, every moment you're left alone with your thoughts. It turns your need for connection into a hunger that can never be satisfied, no matter how much someone else tries to love you. And when that person inevitably falls short, because everyone does, sooner or later, you turn your longing into accusation. You hold up their coldness like a mirror, desperate to avoid seeing your own reflection. This isn't cruelty, it's survival. It's the mind's way of protecting you from the unbearable weight of regret. It's easier to feel wronged than to feel empty. It's easier to focus on what someone else isn't giving you than to sit with what you haven't given yourself. And so, you replay the same patterns, reaching, hoping, blaming, each time convincing yourself that this time it will be different, that this person will finally warm the places inside you that have grown cold. But the cycle is relentless. The more you demand from others, the more disappointed you become. The more you blame their distance, the further away you feel. You try harder to win their affection, to draw them near, to melt the ice you think surrounds their heart. But each attempt leaves you feeling smaller, needier, more dependent on their response. Their coldness becomes the focus of your world, the explanation for every ache and every silence. The hardest truth is that no one else can save you from your own regret. No one else can fill the spaces you've left empty. No one else can live the unlived life you mourn, or give back the chances you let slip away. The warmth you crave can't come from someone else's hands. Not truly. Not for long. It must come from your own willingness to face yourself, to grieve what's lost, to forgive yourself for the choices you made, or didn't make. This is not an easy path. It requires sitting with discomfort, feeling the ache of longing without immediately reaching for blame. It means asking yourself hard questions. What am I missing from my own life? What am I afraid to confront? What regrets am I carrying, hoping someone else will heal them for me? It means learning to befriend your own emptiness, to let it soften rather than harden you, to treat yourself with the warmth you so desperately seek in others. And when you do, when you finally turn inward, when you offer yourself the understanding, the forgiveness, the compassion you've been begging for, you'll notice something shift. The coldness in others stops feeling like a personal attack. Their distance becomes neutral, even understandable. You stop projecting your longing onto them, and instead, you begin to fill the emptiness from within. You start to reclaim your own story, to take responsibility for your happiness, to let regret transform from a wound into a lesson. It's then, and only then, that true connection becomes possible. When you no longer need someone to rescue you from yourself, you can love them for who they are, not for what they can give you. You can be present, generous, warm, without demanding that they fix your loneliness. And you can accept their limitations, their silences, their imperfections, without letting them trigger the old ache of regret. In the end, the reflection of regret is not your enemy. It's a signal, a reminder to turn inward, to do the work that only you can do. Blaming others for your emptiness is a temporary relief, but it keeps you trapped in longing. Facing yourself is harder, but it's the only way to become whole. So next time you find yourself blaming someone's coldness for your pain, pause. Look into the mirror of your own longing. Ask yourself what you truly need, what you have not given yourself, what regrets you're ready to lay to rest. Only then will you find the warmth you seek, not in someone else's eyes, but in your own. Incinerating your truth. You know the feeling before it even begins. The sharp flicker of anxiety, the tremor in your chest as you step toward a moment that demands honesty. Maybe it's a conversation with someone you love, or the silent negotiation that happens every day at work, at home, with friends. You sense in your bones that to be fully yourself is to risk something precious: approval, acceptance, the fragile comfort of belonging. So you make the oldest trade in the book. You incinerate your truth, hoping the ashes will be enough to build a home inside someone else's expectations. It starts small. Maybe you soften your opinions, laugh at jokes you don't find funny, hide parts of your story that feel too raw, too sharp, too different. You tell yourself it's temporary, a necessary compromise. Everyone does it. But with each moment of silence, each surrender of your boundaries, you notice a hollowing out inside. Your true feelings, your anger, your joy, your secret dreams are reduced to cinders, sacrificed for peace, for connection, for that quick sigh of relief that comes when conflict is avoided and you're allowed to stay. At first, it works. The world responds well to your burning. You become easy to love, easy to manage, easy to keep around. People are drawn to the warmth of your self-erasure, even if they don't realize what it costs you. Compliments flow. Invitations arrive. You fit. You belong, or so it seems. But the cost is relentless, and it always grows. Every time you erase a boundary, you become a little less visible to yourself. The line between who you are and who you pretend to be blurs. You start forgetting your own limits, your own needs, your own voice. You agree when you want to say no. You endure what hurts you. You absorb the moods of others, bend to their will, lose yourself in their desires. In chasing safety, you set your own truth on fire, watching the smoke rise and telling yourself, this is what love looks like. There are so many ways to burn. The student who hides their identity to avoid ridicule, convincing themselves that acceptance is worth any sacrifice. The partner who swallows their needs, thinking that being easygoing will make them indispensable. The friend who laughs off every wound, terrified that setting a boundary will lead to abandonment. The worker who stays silent in meetings, their ideas incinerated before they can even be spoken, all to keep the uneasy peace. Each story is the same at its core, a desperate hope that total surrender will finally earn belonging. If you give enough, you think, eventually you'll be enough. If you make yourself small enough, agreeable enough, harmless enough, there will be no reason for them to leave. You try to disappear into their needs, hoping they'll notice and reward you with love. But the more you disappear, the less there is for anyone to see, much less cherish. The pain of this bargain accumulates slowly, like smoke in a sealed room. You may start to feel tired for no reason, restless in ways you can't explain. You wake up and go through the motions, but your reflection is a stranger. Moments that used to bring joy now feel muted, even hollow. You sense the absence of something essential, but you can't quite name it. The world seems to move on, unaware that you are shrinking, burning from the inside out. Sometimes the realization comes in a flash. Someone crosses a line, asks for one sacrifice too many, and you feel a sudden heat, a spark of anger that refuses to die. Other times, it creeps in slowly, over years, until the longing for authenticity outweighs the fear of being left behind. You start to crave the weight of your own truth, the clarity of your boundaries, the fire of your own opinions, the relief of finally being whole. But reclaiming yourself is not easy. The first time you say no, the first time you hold your ground, it can feel like setting off alarms in every room. You fear backlash, silence, rejection. Maybe you lose friends, partners, opportunities. Maybe you stand alone in the ashes, wondering if the cost of honesty is too high. But in that raw, exposed place, something miraculous happens. You meet yourself again, not as the reflection in someone else's eyes, but as a living, breathing presence. Your truth, once sacrificed, rises through the smoke, demanding to be honored. And in time, the right people respond. The ones who want you for your whole self, not just your compliance. The ones who value your boundaries, respect your truth, and see your honesty as a gift, not a threat. You find, slowly, that belonging is not something you earn by burning yourself down, but something you discover by being impossible to ignore. The fire that once destroyed yourself is the same fire that forges your strength. It's easy to believe that surrendering your truth is a small price for love, but in the end, the only love worth keeping is the kind that survives the heat of your honesty. The only belonging worth having is the kind that honors your boundaries, even when they are inconvenient. Anything less is just survival, floating through life on the ashes of what you could have been. So, tonight, if you feel the urge to burn away a piece of yourself to avoid rejection, pause. Notice what you're about to sacrifice. Ask yourself who you would be if you let your truth survive the fire. Trust that your boundaries are not a wall, but a signal, a beacon to those who are meant to find you. Refuse to be the fuel for someone else's comfort. Stand in your truth, however shaky, however small, and watch as the smoke clears and you finally, quietly, come home to yourself. Stitches over wounds. You've been here before, sitting in the quiet aftermath, looking down at a heart held together by threads that were never meant to last. Another goodbye, another sharp silence where connection used to live. And still, you reach for the needle. You find a scrap of borrowed hope, something a friend said, something you read, something from a dream you once had, and you stitch. Not to heal, not really, just to hold the shape of yourself together for a little longer. It's never clean. The thread doesn't match the wound. The patch doesn't fit the tear, but you do it anyway. You tell yourself it's temporary, just enough to get through the week, just enough to stop the ache from spilling into everything you touch. You smile when people ask how you're doing. You give them the practiced answer, then change the subject before the seams start to show. The wounds aren't just from lovers. Some came from the absence of love, from the things no one said, from the hands that didn't reach back, from all the times you offered your heart gently, honestly, and watched it return bruised or not at all. You told yourself you were strong, that you'd grow from it, that next time would be different. But after a while, even the strongest parts of you begin to fray. So, you start borrowing. You use their hope when yours runs dry. You take pieces of their joy, their vision of a future you can't quite see yourself. You mimic the rhythms of people who still believe in something whole. You let yourself imagine again, not because you trust it, but because it's easier to pretend. You stitch their light into your darkness and wear it like armor. But it doesn't hold. Not for long. The fabric pulls, the seams tear. You feel it during quiet nights, when the weight of what you are carrying tugs at the corners. You feel it in conversations that suddenly go silent, in rooms that feel colder the moment someone leaves. You walk through days with a smile that's too tight, a laugh that feels delayed. You tell yourself you're okay, but the stitches ache. You've become a master of appearance, a sculptor of surface. You've learned how to thread illusion through pain so precisely that even you forget it's there. People call you resilient, strong, wise beyond your years. They don't see the trembling under the thread, the way you have to sew yourself back together every morning before the world sees you. They don't know that each patch is borrowed, that none of it truly belongs to you. And still, you love. You try. You let people in. You tell yourself this one will be different, that maybe you've finally stitched enough to hold. Maybe this love will mend what others only masked. But old wounds have memory. They remember the shape of abandonment, the texture of betrayal. They tug at new hands, fearing they'll let go too. You feel it. When you pull back before you're hurt, when you test someone's love just to prove it won't last, when you sabotage peace because it doesn't feel familiar. You don't want to be this way. You long to be soft again, to trust without flinching, to love without calculation. But softness feels dangerous when your history is sharp, so you keep patching. You carry the illusion like a stitched-together tapestry of maybes, what-ifs, and someday soons. But some nights, when the world goes still, you touch the seams and whisper, "This isn't healing. This is survival." You know the difference. Healing is messy, slow, raw. Healing means pulling the stitches out, letting the wound breathe, letting it bleed again before it seals for real. But that's terrifying, because what if there's nothing left beneath the illusion? What if the wound is too deep, too wide, too permanent to ever truly close? So you do what you've always done. You gather more scraps, a quote from a stranger, a half-remembered promise, a glimpse of connection, and you sew, because it's what you know. Because undoing would mean unraveling everything, and you're not sure who you'd be without the threads. But one day, maybe not soon, but eventually, you'll meet someone who doesn't flinch at your seams, someone who sees the stitches, not as deception, but as proof of survival. They won't tug at your threads. They'll sit with you while you unpick them yourself. They'll hold your hand when the wound opens again. They'll remind you that healing isn't about hiding the scar. It's about no longer needing to patch it. And maybe, in that moment, you'll put the needle down. But until then, you'll keep doing what you've always done. You'll stitch, you'll patch, you'll gather hope in pieces, thread it through pain, and wear it with grace. Not because it fixes you, but because it keeps you going. Because it tells the world, I may be torn, but I'm still here. And that is enough. Web of denial. There's a particular kind of silence you carry when the truth becomes too sharp to touch. So instead, you tell yourself stories, tiny, delicate lies spun from threads of hope, fear, and memory. You weave them carefully, wrapping the pain in explanations that sound just close enough to real. You say, they didn't mean it, or it's not always like this, or maybe I'm just too sensitive. And each time you do, you add another strand to the web. You think you're holding everything together. But what you're really doing is binding yourself in place, trapped in a tangle of self-betrayal, dressed up as loyalty. This is the web of denial. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, it's a survival instinct. Something hurts. But instead of confronting it, you soften it. You reframe it. You call it something else. A harsh word becomes a bad day. A broken promise becomes a misunderstanding. You start patching over wounds with reasons, justifications, anything to make the world feel safer than it actually is. Because the alternative, that you're being hurt by someone you trusted, that the love you give is not returned in kind, that your pain is not an accident but a pattern, is too unbearable to face. So you tell yourself stories. Not because you're naive, but because you're loyal. You want to believe. You need to believe. In the goodness of the person, in the strength of the relationship, in your own ability to make it all okay if you just try harder. So you explain the pain away. You shrink your needs, edit your memories, twist yourself into shapes that fit better inside someone else's version of reality. Each strand of denial feels like a kindness. You're not lying to hurt yourself. You're lying to survive. But over time, the web tightens. The truth doesn't go away. It waits. It pulls at you in quiet moments, in the pit of your stomach, in the hesitation before you speak, in the way your voice catches when someone asks if you're really okay. And still, you spin. You defend the person who's hurting you. You justify the relationship that's hollowed you out. You insist that love means staying, even when staying means abandoning yourself. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Loyalty can become a cage. Devotion can disguise dysfunction. And when you begin betraying yourself to protect someone else, it doesn't matter how noble your intentions are. You're bleeding for a version of love that does not love you back. You're sacrificing clarity for the illusion of connection. And every time you explain away the damage, every time you smooth over the hurt, you disappear just a little more. It's easy to say, leave. But webs aren't broken that easily. They are built slowly, strand by strand, and each thread is made of a part of you. Your hope, your history, your belief that this pain has a purpose, that it will lead somewhere, that it proves something. You convince yourself that your endurance is strength, that your silence is maturity, that your ache is a sign of love's depth. But deep down, a quieter truth thrums beneath the lies. If the story requires your suffering to survive, it was never a story worth keeping. And yet, there's fear in letting go, because the moment you stop spinning, the entire web trembles. You start to see what you've built. Not a sanctuary, but a trap. Not a testament to love, but a monument to what you've endured. You wonder who you'll be without it. What you'll find in the silence when the stories stop. But there is power in that pause, because that's when you realize truth doesn't destroy you. It frees you. You don't have to keep justifying your pain. You don't have to stay tangled in someone else's version of you. You can choose at any moment to stop weaving and start walking. The world outside the web is vast and terrifying and full of light. Your voice, long buried under the weight of your own explanations, is still there, waiting. You are allowed to name the hurt. You are allowed to leave what breaks you. You are allowed to love yourself more than the story that once made you feel safe. So, if you find yourself tangled in the web of denial, whispering old lines to protect someone who no longer protects you, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, who benefits from this silence? What would happen if you stopped spinning? What if the truth, no matter how painful, is the first strand of something new, not a web, but a bridge, leading you home to yourself? Because in the end, love doesn't need to be explained away. Loyalty shouldn't cost your voice. And the stories worth telling are the ones where you finally choose truth over illusion, and freedom over the quiet, slow erosion of who you are.